The cold air holds its breath, and the world turns quietly white. Deep in the heart of the Ardennes forest, where the hills roll like sleeping giants under a blanket of frost, lies the gentle village of Stoumont. It is a place of ancient stone and heavy timber, of narrow lanes winding between sturdy homes that have stood for generations. On this winter evening, the sky above the Amblève Valley is a soft, pale gray, thick with the promise of snow. And as the daylight fades into a tender twilight, the snowflakes begin to fall. They drift down in absolute silence, large and feathery, settling onto the dark, sleeping slates of the rooftops. They gather on the bare branches of the oak and pine trees, turning the dark woods into a pale, woven tapestry. This is a quiet corner of the world. For the villagers of Stoumont, the rhythms of life have always been dictated by the seasons, by the slow turning of the earth and the reliable rising of the sun. Even now, with the world beyond their valley caught in the turbulent grip of a long and wearying war, the village feels secluded, hidden away in a pocket of profound stillness. The war is a distant rumble, a shadow that belongs to other places. Here, the immediate reality is the cold, and the deep, abiding need for warmth. Inside the homes, behind thick walls of stone and heavy wooden doors, life slows to a comforting pace. The scent of wood smoke drifts from brick chimneys, carrying the fragrant aroma of burning pine and oak out into the freezing air. Inside, hearths are swept clean, and fires are built up to push back the evening chill. You can imagine a mother in her kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, kneading dough for the morning's bread. The rhythmic push and pull of her hands is a quiet meditation, a prayer for tomorrow. In the corner, a grandmother sits in a worn wooden chair, the steady click of her knitting needles keeping time with the ticking clock on the mantel. She is making thick wool socks, weaving her love and care into every loop of yarn, hoping they will be enough to keep the winter at bay. The children of Stoumont press their small faces against the frosty window panes, their breath making little clouds on the cold glass. They watch the snow pile up on the cobblestones, dreaming of the games they will play when the morning comes. They are insulated by the love of their families, wrapped in the innocent belief that their homes are fortresses, safe and untouchable. For them, the falling snow is not a harsh element, but a gentle magic that transforms their familiar village into a wonderland of pure, untouched white. But the villagers are not alone in Stoumont tonight. Sharing this quiet winter are the young men from across the ocean. American soldiers, boys really, barely out of their teens. They have been sent to this secluded sector of the forest to rest, to catch their breath in what is known to be a quiet, inactive area. They wear heavy wool coats that feel inadequate against the deep, damp chill of a European winter, a cold that seems to seep straight into their bones. These young men are strangers in a strange land, a long, long way from the rolling plains of the Midwest, the busy streets of eastern cities, or the warm sun of the southern farms. They stand on the snowy corners of the village, their breath pluming in the icy air, stamping their heavy boots to keep the feeling in their toes. Their faces are young, etched with an exhaustion that goes deeper than lack of sleep. It is the exhaustion of carrying a heavy burden, of being far from the people they love, of missing the simple comforts of their own beds and the sound of their mothers' voices. Yet, in this quiet village, a gentle understanding blossoms between the soldiers and the locals. They do not share a language, but they share the human experience of the cold, and the deep desire for peace. A door opens, spilling a rectangle of warm, golden light onto the snowy street. A Belgian woman steps out, a thick shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. In her hands, she carries a steaming mug of dark, bitter chicory coffee. She walks up to a young soldier leaning against a stone wall, his hands tucked deep into his pockets. She offers him the mug with a soft smile, her eyes full of a maternal kindness that transcends words. He takes it, his cold fingers wrapping gratefully around the heated clay. He nods, whispering a quiet word of thanks. In that brief exchange, in the rising steam of the warm drink and the shared silence of the falling snow, there is a profound sense of grace. It is a tiny spark of light against the vast, dark winter. As the evening deepens into night, the soldiers retreat to their billets. Some are sheltered in the sturdy barns attached to the farmhouses, resting on beds of dry, fragrant hay. Others are gathered in the cellars, where the earth provides a natural insulation against the freezing wind. The spaces are lit by the soft, flickering glow of lanterns and solitary candles, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. It is in these quiet, stolen hours that the true heart of the soldier is revealed. Away from the watchful eyes of their commanders, away from the need to be brave, they are just young men missing home. Many of them reach for their canvas packs, pulling out slightly crumpled pads of paper and stubby pencils. They sit cross-legged on their bedrolls, leaning close to the candlelight, and they begin to write. The scratching of a pencil on paper is a lonely, intimate sound. It is the sound of a heart reaching across thousands of miles of ocean. The ink flows slowly in the cold, but the words pour out from a place of deep longing. They do not write of grand strategies or the mechanics of war. They write of the things that matter. One boy writes to his mother, telling her not to worry. He tells her that he is safe, that he is resting in a beautiful, snowy village that looks just like a picture on a Christmas card. He promises her that he is wearing the scarf she knitted, holding back the truth of how violently he shivers in the night. He asks about the family dog, wondering if he still sleeps by the radiator in the hallway. He asks if the ice on the pond behind their house has frozen thick enough for skating yet. Another soldier writes to his sweetheart. He describes the quiet of the forest, how the trees look like they are wearing heavy white coats. He traces the shape of a heart on the bottom of the page, a simple, fragile testament to a love that anchors him in this foreign place. He closes his eyes and tries to remember the smell of her perfume, the sound of her laugh on a summer evening, pulling the memory around him like a protective blanket. In the soft glow of the cellar, another young man reads a letter he has received. It is worn at the edges, folded and unfolded a dozen times. It smells faintly of vanilla and home. He reads the words slowly, savoring each one, letting the familiar handwriting soothe the ache in his chest. For a few precious moments, he is not a soldier in a freezing barn in Belgium. He is back in his own living room, sitting on the rug by the fire, surrounded by the people who know his heart. These letters are lifelines. They are tiny pieces of paper carrying an immense weight of emotion, fragile bridges connecting the cold reality of the Ardennes to the warm, glowing hearths of home. They fold the letters carefully, slipping them into the breast pockets of their uniform shirts, keeping them close to their hearts, where they offer a different kind of warmth. Outside, the snow continues to fall, softening the sharp edges of the world. It covers the tire tracks on the roads, smooths over the footprints in the lanes, turning the village into a pristine, silent painting. The wind has died down entirely, leaving behind a stillness so deep it feels almost holy. The Meuse River, flowing steadily at the bottom of the valley, is a ribbon of dark glass cutting through the white earth, its water moving with a slow, quiet determination beneath the gathering ice. The village of Stoumont slumbers. The fires in the hearths burn down to glowing red embers, pulsing softly in the dark. The villagers sleep under heavy quilts, dreaming of the coming spring, of green shoots pushing through the thawing soil. The American soldiers sleep in their barns and cellars, their breathing slow and rhythmic, their faces finally relaxed, free from the quiet anxiety that follows them through their waking hours. There is no fear in this moment. There is only the snow, falling softly, patiently, wrapping the valley in a peaceful embrace. The trees stand as silent sentinels, holding the weight of the winter with ancient grace. The slate roofs disappear under the thickening white blanket. It is a night of profound, beautiful quiet. The world has hushed itself to sleep. No one knows what the morning will bring. No one can hear the distant, heavy shadows gathering far beyond the tree line. For now, there is only the gentle rhythm of resting hearts, the soft scratch of a pen on paper, the lingering warmth of a shared cup of coffee, and the quiet, endless falling of the snow. The valley breathes in the cold, pure air, and rests, held safely in the delicate, frozen stillness of the night. A low, rhythmic tremor stirs beneath the frost, a sound felt in the quiet of the chest before it is ever truly heard by the ear. Morning arrives in the village of Stoumont not with a burst of golden sunlight, but with a slow, hesitant softening of the dark. The sky turns the color of a dove's wing, pale and muted, blending seamlessly with the heavy snow that blankets the valley. The world is still wrapped in the innocent slumber of the night before. Icicles hang like glass pendants from the edges of the slate roofs, catching the faint, milky light of the dawn. Inside the stone houses, the embers in the hearths are gently coaxed back to life. The soft scraping of an iron poker against brick, the gentle crackle of dry pine needles catching fire, the quiet hum of a kettle warming on the stove, these are the peaceful, familiar sounds of waking. But as the morning stretches its cold limbs, a new sensation creeps into the valley. It is not the wind, for the air is incredibly still. The branches of the great oak trees do not sway. Yet, a vibration begins to travel through the frozen earth. It travels up through the cobblestones, through the thick stone walls, and into the soles of the heavy leather boots of the young soldiers standing watch. It is a distant, muffled rumble. A continuous, rolling murmur that sounds like a summer thunderstorm trapped far beyond the horizon, beneath the heavy layers of winter clouds. But there are no thunderstorms in the dead of winter. In a small, warm kitchen, a local woman pauses as she pours steaming water into a porcelain cup. She watches, mesmerized and entirely still, as the dark surface of the coffee shivers. Tiny ripples form in the center of the cup, expanding outward in perfect, trembling circles. She sets the heavy iron kettle down, her hands moving with a sudden, careful slowness. She does not speak. She simply looks toward the frosted window, toward the deep, towering woods to the east. Outside, the American boys who had spent the night dreaming of warm living rooms and safe homes are stepping out into the biting air. They pull the collars of their wool coats up around their ears, their breath forming small, white clouds that hang in the stillness. They hear the sound, too. They pause in the snowy streets, mugs of bitter coffee warming their bare hands, and turn their young faces toward the tree line. The Ardennes forest is ancient and vast. Its hills are covered in countless, towering pine trees, their dark green needles heavily burdened with fresh snow. These pines are the guardians of the valley, standing shoulder to shoulder in silent ranks. Usually, they swallow the sounds of the world, creating a profound, insulating quiet. But this morning, the pines act as hollow wooden flutes. They catch the distant vibrations and carry them through the valleys, echoing the low, heavy thuds, passing the invisible weight of the sound from ridge to ridge, until it spills down into the streets of Stoumont. It is the whisper of a massive advance. It is the sound of thousands of heavy treads, of cold metal, of an approaching storm that has nothing to do with the weather. Yet, there is no panic in the village. There is only a sudden, profound slowing of time. A heavy, shared unease settles over the valley like a second layer of frost. It coats everything. The villagers step out onto their wooden porches, wrapping their woolen shawls tighter around their shoulders. They exchange quiet, knowing glances with their neighbors. The elders of the village, those whose faces are deeply lined by the passage of time and the memory of older, darker days, close their eyes and listen. They recognize the hollow thud echoing through the earth. They know the language of the trembling ground. A young soldier, his cheeks flushed from the biting cold, walks down the lane. He carries a bundle of chopped firewood in his arms, meant for the stove in the cellar where his friends are trying to stay warm. A little girl, no older than 6, stands by her wooden front gate, bundled in a bright red coat that stands out like a solitary berry against the vast white landscape. She has dropped her knitted mitten in the snow. The young soldier stops. He kneels down in the snow, his movements slow and gentle so as not to startle her. He brushes the white flakes from the damp wool of the mitten and hands it back to her with a soft, reassuring smile. She takes it with tiny, cold fingers and offers him a shy, gap-toothed grin. For a brief second, the rumble in the earth fades. There is only the quiet innocence of the child, the kindness in the soldier's tired eyes, and the unspoken wish to protect this tiny, fragile moment. The little girl's mother appears in the doorway. She looks at the soldier, her eyes wide with a quiet, unutterable fear. She does not look at the woods, she only looks at the boy in the uniform. She whispers a soft word of thanks, stepping forward to gently pull her daughter back into the safety of the stone house. The door closes with a soft click. The soldier stands up, the smile slowly fading from his lips as he turns his gaze back to the dark line of trees. He shifts the firewood in his arms, suddenly feeling the immense, crushing weight of his duty. Inside the damp cellars and the drafty barns, the mood has shifted. The gentle, nostalgic letter-writing of the night before has taken on a new, quiet urgency. The young men sit on their bedrolls, resting their notebooks on their knees. They listen to the echoes rolling through the pines. The sound is a constant companion now, a low hum that vibrates in their teeth. They pick up their stubby pencils again. Their fingers are stiff with cold, but they write with a desperate, focused need. They do not write about the rumbling. They do not want to frighten the people they love. They do not want to put the heavy fear that sits in their own chests down onto the paper. Instead, they write about love. One boy writes a letter to his father. He thanks him for teaching him how to fish on those quiet summer mornings by the lake. He writes about how much he misses the smell of the pine shavings in his father's workshop. He pours all his gratitude into the graphite, hoping the words will carry the warmth he feels in his heart. Another writes to his younger sister. He tells her to be good to their mother, to help with the dishes, and to save him a piece of pie when he finally comes home. He draws a small, funny caricature of himself shivering in the snow, trying to make her laugh, trying to send a piece of his smile across the ocean before the shadows grow any longer. They are holding onto these fragile hopes, pressing them into the thin paper. Every word is a quiet rebellion against the encroaching dark, a way to anchor their souls to the light, to the warm, safe places they left behind. They are just boys, asked to stand at the edge of the world and hold back the tide. And in the quiet privacy of their own minds, they are afraid. It is a very human, very gentle fear. The fear of not seeing the spring. The fear of the unknown that is marching toward them through the freezing fog. But alongside the fear, there is a quiet, stunning resilience. They fold their letters, tucking them safely into their pockets. They check the laces on their heavy boots. They share half-smoked cigarettes with their friends, the brief flare of the match illuminating faces that are suddenly pale, yet deeply resolved. They pat each other on the shoulder, offering silent words of comfort. I am here. You are not alone. As the morning wears on, the pale light begins to fail. The horizon to the east, just above the jagged line of the pine trees, begins to darken. It is not the purple hue of a setting sun, but a bruised, heavy charcoal gray. The whispers in the woods are growing louder. The echoes are no longer distant. The trembling in the earth is constant now, a steady, rhythmic beating like the heart of some great, sleeping beast waking in the deep woods. The villagers pull their heavy wooden shutters closed, latching them from the inside. The click of the metal locks echoes down the narrow, snowy streets. The village is holding its breath. The smoke from the chimneys seems to hang suspended in the freezing air, reluctant to drift away. The young soldiers take their places at the edge of the town. They stand by the stone walls and the snow-covered hedges, peering into the dense, white curtain of the winter landscape. The cold bites at their cheeks and numbs their fingers, but they do not move. They stand together, a thin, fragile line of warmth and beating hearts against the vast, freezing unknown. The quiet morning is gone. The gentle snow continues to fall, softly burying the footprints they have made, covering the world in a deceptive, beautiful peace. But the air is heavy with anticipation. The valley waits, listening to the echoes through the pines, as the shadows on the horizon stretch long and dark across the pristine, sleeping snow. The world does not fade away with a sudden crash, but with a slow, pale exhale that gently swallows the trees. It begins in the lowest creases of the valley, down where the dark waters of the Meuse River run quietly beneath a skin of fresh ice. The water is warmer than the bitter winter air, and as the two meet, a thick, heavy vapor is born. It is the breath of the valley. Slowly, silently, it rises. It creeps up the snowy embankments, weaving its way through the naked, shivering branches of the willows and the deep, evergreen boughs of the ancient pines. It does not rush. It moves with a lazy, dreamlike deliberate pace, a rising tide of pure white mist that slowly claims the landscape, inch by invisible inch. By mid-morning, the village of Stoumont is no longer a collection of stone houses and winding cobblestone streets. It has become an island lost in a sea of milk. The fog is so dense, so absolute, that it erases the horizon entirely. It erases the hills, the forests, and the sky. It presses against the window panes of the village homes, a soft, blind weight. For the people huddled inside, looking out into the morning is like looking into a blank sheet of paper. The familiar outlines of their neighbors' homes, the wooden fences they built with their own hands, the grand old oak tree at the center of the square, all of it has vanished, erased by the gentle, creeping cloud. Inside the homes, the world has shrunk to the size of a single room. A grandfather sits in his woolen chair near the hearth, the fire casting a weak, golden glow against the encroaching gray light. He packs his wooden pipe with slow, methodical movements, listening to the absolute hush outside. There is no sound of birds, no rustle of wind, no crunch of boots on the snow. The mist is acting like a heavy woolen blanket thrown over the entire village, dampening every sound, swallowing every echo. A mother stands by the kitchen basin, a chipped porcelain teacup in her hands. She does not wash it. She simply holds it, her eyes fixed on the frosted glass of the window, staring into the impenetrable white. She is praying, not with words, but with the quiet, steady beating of her heart. She is praying for the fog to hide them, to wrap them in its soft, concealing arms and keep the distant thunder of the world away. But outside, standing on the very edge of the village, the young American soldiers do not feel hidden. They feel entirely, profoundly alone. When you are standing in a fog this thick, the world ends an arm's length away. A young man, barely 19 years old, stands beside a low stone wall, his rifle resting heavy and cold in his numb hands. If he reaches out, he cannot clearly see his own fingertips. The mist is not just a visual curtain, it is a physical presence. It is damp and freezing, seeping through the heavy wool of his olive-drab coat, weaving its way through the knitted threads of his scarf, settling like tiny, icy diamonds on his eyelashes and the soft peach fuzz of his cheeks. He breathes in, and the air tastes like wet iron and crushed pine needles. He breathes out, and his own breath is instantly swallowed by the vast, breathing cloud of the valley. Just 10 feet away, another soldier stands leaning against a frozen birch tree. But to the first boy, his friend is nothing more than a smudge, a dark, ghostly phantom hovering in the white. They are standing a few paces apart, yet they might as well be on different planets. This is the peculiar, haunting isolation of the mist. It takes a company of brothers and turns them into a collection of solitary souls, drifting in a vast, empty void. To combat the crushing loneliness, the phantom by the tree clears his throat. The sound is startlingly loud in a muffled quiet, heavy and flat. "You still there, Jimmy?" he whispers. His voice does not carry, it drops directly into the snow at his feet. "I'm here," comes the soft reply from the stone wall. "Cold." "Yeah. Cold." It is a conversation of only 4 words, but it is a lifeline. It is a desperate, quiet proof that they still exist, that the world has not completely dissolved, that they have not been left entirely alone at the edge of the universe. The phantom by the tree shifts his weight, the snow squeaking softly under the thick rubber soles of his boots. He pulls a woolen mitten off with his teeth, reaching a bare, aching hand deep into his coat pocket. His fingers search past spare ammunition, past a tin of hardened shoe polish, until they find what they are looking for. It is a letter, folded and refolded so many times the creases are soft and worn like old fabric. He does not need to read it. He cannot read it in this pale, shadowless light anyway. But he runs his thumb over the paper, feeling the impression of the pen strokes pressed into the grain. It is from his older sister. She wrote it sitting at the kitchen table back in Ohio, while the radio played softly in the background and a pie cooled on the windowsill. As he stands in the blinding white of the Belgian forest, he closes his eyes. If he keeps them closed, the freezing mist fades away, and he can smell the cinnamon. He can hear the tinny, distant sound of the brass band on the radio. He can see the yellow floral pattern of the kitchen wallpaper. He wraps his mind around this memory, pulling it tight around his shoulders like a quilt. In the deep, isolating chill of the valley's breath, this fragile piece of paper, and the love it represents, is the only thing generating any true warmth. It is a small, quiet act of everyday heroism, the determination to hold on to humanity, to hold on to love, when everything else has been erased by the cold. Further down the line, another boy is struggling to keep his eyes open. The fog is hypnotic. It has no edges, no shadows, no movement to hold the attention. Staring into the endless, uniform gray-white is like staring into the back of your own eyelids. The cold is seeping into his joints, making his limbs feel like they are filled with lead. The urge to simply sit down in the soft snow, to close his eyes and drift away into the peaceful, silent cloud, is overwhelming. It would be so easy. So gentle. To keep himself awake, he plays a game in his mind. He builds a house. He starts with the foundation, imagining the heavy stones being laid one by one in the dark earth. He imagines raising the wooden frame, the smell of fresh-cut lumber bright and sharp in his nose. He carefully, meticulously imagines driving every single nail. He pictures the front porch, deciding to paint it a soft, sky blue. He imagines a swing on that porch, and who might sit there with him on a warm summer evening when the war is nothing more than a fading dream. He builds this imaginary house board by board, nail by nail, standing completely still in the freezing mist. It is a private, beautiful refuge, constructed purely of hope and willpower, standing defiant against the desolate reality of the winter woods. Hours bleed into one another. Time loses all meaning in the fog. There is no sun to track across the sky, no shadows to stretch and grow. There is only a persistent, unwavering twilight. For the defenders of Stoumont, the blindness is agonizing, but it also carries a strange, unsettling kind of peace. Because they cannot see the dark tree line, they do not have to look at the place where the danger sleeps. Because they cannot see the road leading out of the valley, they do not have to watch the horizon for moving shadows. The world has been reduced to a circle of white, only a few feet across. For now, in this suspended, breathless moment, nothing exists outside that circle. There is no past, no future, no war, no enemy. There is only the damp wool of their coats, the slow, steady rhythm of their breathing, and the memories they cradle in their minds. Occasionally, a breeze will stir, incredibly weak, barely a sigh. It causes the mist to swirl and eddy, parting for a fraction of a second to reveal a dark, jagged pine branch, or the snow-covered roof of a nearby barn, before the curtain closes again. These brief glimpses of reality are almost jarring, a sudden reminder that the physical world is still out there, waiting patiently for the fog to lift. Down in the cellars beneath the sanatorium, the wounded are resting. The thick stone walls keep the freezing mist at bay, but the dampness still finds its way in, pooling in the corners and making the air feel heavy in the lungs. A young medic moves quietly between the stretchers, a single kerosene lantern swinging gently in his hand. The soft, yellow light washes over the pale, exhausted faces of the resting men. He steps lightly, adjusting a woolen blanket here, checking a bandage there. He has no medicine left to give, no miracles to offer. All he has is his presence. He kneels beside a boy whose eyes are squeezed tightly shut in a restless sleep. The boy is shivering, a low, quiet hum of discomfort escaping his lips. The medic reaches out, placing a warm, bare hand gently against the boy's cheek. It is a simple, human touch, entirely unnecessary for any medical reason, but essential for the soul. The boy's shivering slows. His breathing deepens, settling into an easier rhythm. The medic stays there for a long time in the dim cellar, his hand resting on the boy's face, anchoring him to the world of the living, offering a quiet, unspoken promise that he is not alone in the dark. Up above, the valley continues to breathe. The mist grows thicker as the afternoon wears on, turning from a pale, pearlescent white to a deep, bruised gray. The cold deepens, sinking its teeth into the earth, freezing the moisture on the tree branches until the pines are coated in a heavy, brittle armor of ice. The soldiers remain at their posts. They look like statues carved from snow, unmoving, uncomplaining, silently bearing the weight of the winter sky. They are boys who have been asked to become men too quickly, standing in a void where bravery is not about charging forward with a shout, but about standing perfectly still in the freezing silence, holding the line against the invisible dark. They lean against the stone walls and the frozen trees, turning their thoughts inward to survive the outward chill. They think of soft beds and warm fires, of mothers singing in kitchens and fathers reading newspapers in worn armchairs. They think of dogs running across green lawns, of the smell of rain on hot pavement, of the taste of fresh apples. They gather every beautiful, gentle thing they have ever known, pulling it close to their hearts to keep the freezing mist at bay. The village of Stoumont rests inside the cloud, held in a delicate, fragile suspension. The mist cloaks the landscape, isolating every soul, separating every house, wrapping the valley in an eerie, profound silence. It is a quiet that feels both like a blessing and a warning, a beautiful, terrifying pause in the rhythm of the world. And as the gray light slowly deepens toward a starless night, the young men stand watch in the blinding white, alone with their thoughts, waiting for the valley to finally exhale, and for the heavy, isolating curtain to rise. Out of the endless white, the world begins to lose its innocence, returning softly in shades of charcoal and frost. For hours, the young defenders of Stoumont have stood inside a cloud, suspended in a quiet, isolated dream. The mist has been their blanket, their wall, their entire universe. It has kept the war hidden away, allowing their minds to wander back to sunlit porches, to the smell of fresh-cut hay, and to the soft voices of the people who love them. But nature is always moving, always breathing. And as the morning stretches its cold, weary limbs, the wind begins to shift. It is barely a breeze at first, just a gentle, invisible hand brushing through the tops of the frozen pine trees. It dislodges tiny cascades of snow that fall like powdered sugar through the branches, whispering against the bark. But this delicate breath of air is enough. Slowly, the thick curtain of the valley's mist begins to fray at the edges. It swirls and parts, reluctant to give up its hold on the village, yet yielding to the inevitable movement of the winter sky. And as the veil begins to thin, the silence of the morning changes. It is no longer the empty, echoing silence of isolation. It becomes the heavy, textured silence of held breath. Standing by a low stone wall at the eastern edge of the village, a young soldier blinks through eyelashes heavy with frost. He pulls his woolen scarf down just an inch, exposing his nose to the biting air. He does not see anything yet, but he feels a change. He feels it in the soles of his heavy leather boots. A faint, rhythmic vibration is returning to the frozen earth, rising up through the cobblestones and the deep snowpack. It is the same low murmur they had felt at dawn, but now it is closer. It is a slow, steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. Then comes the smell. Woven into the crisp, clean scent of pine needles and damp earth is something sharp and unnatural. It is the faint, metallic scent of diesel smoke and the heavy, oily tang of warm engines. It drifts through the freezing fog, a quiet warning carried on the breeze. The soldier tightens his grip on the cold, varnished wood of his rifle stock. Beneath the thick layers of his olive-drab coat, beneath the woolen sweater his mother knitted for him, his heart begins to race. It beats against his ribs like a trapped bird, a rapid, fluttering rhythm of pure, human instinct. He is so far from home. He is just a boy who knows the smell of a schoolhouse chalkboard, the feeling of a baseball seam under his fingers, and the taste of sweet corn in the summer. He does not belong in this freezing, shadowed forest. Yet, here he stands, rooted in the snow. He turns his head, moving slowly, carefully, and looks to his right. His friend is standing a few paces away, a silhouette slowly coming into focus as the fog recedes. Their eyes meet. No words are spoken. There is no need for words. In that single, shared glance, an entire lifetime of understanding passes between them. They share a quiet acknowledgement of their fear, an unspoken promise to stay together, and a tragic, beautiful realization that their isolated dream is coming to an end. His friend gives a small, almost imperceptible nod, and turns back toward the tree line. Slowly, the shadows begin to form in the white. They do not appear all at once. They bleed into the visible world softly, like dark ink dropped into a glass of milk. At first, they are just smudges, darker patches of gray against the pale, swirling mist. But as the breeze pushes the fog back down into the valley, the smudges take on shape. They gain edges. They gain depth. They emerge like ghosts walking out of a forgotten story. First come the men. They walk slowly, their heads bowed against the bitter cold, their shoulders hunched under the weight of their gear. They are dressed in heavy coats that blend with the shadows of the trees, their breath rising in plumes of white steam that mingle with the fading fog. They step carefully through the deep snow, their boots making a soft, rhythmic crunching sound that carries clearly across the open fields. To the young Americans watching from the village, these approaching figures seem almost ethereal. In this hushed, whispered moment before the reality of the world intrudes, they do not look like a terrifying enemy. They simply look like weary travelers, lost in the snow, walking a long, cold road. The snowflakes fall gently on both sides of the field, resting on the helmets of the defenders and the vanguard alike, indifferent to the insignias on their collars. The cold bites at all of their cheeks, numbing the fingers of every boy who stands in the snow, regardless of the language he speaks. But behind the walking men, larger shadows are moving. They are massive, dark shapes, rising up from the mist like iron beasts waking from a long slumber. They do not walk, they roll, their heavy steel tracks squeaking and grinding against the frozen earth. The sound is low and mournful, a deep, mechanical groan that echoes off the stone walls of the village. The engines hum with a deep, throaty vibration, exhaling thick clouds of exhaust that darken the falling snow. As the fog continues to lift, peeling back to reveal the sloping fields leading toward the woods, the sheer scale of the shadow falling over Stoumont becomes clear. It is not a handful of men lost in the woods. It is a vanguard. A vast, heavy procession of armor and infantry, stretching back into the tree line as far as the eye can see. The racing hearts of the defenders stumble. The air in their lungs suddenly feels incredibly thin. They are a small group of boys, holding a quiet village with little more than the rifles in their hands and the courage in their chests. And now, out of the blinding white, a dark, overwhelming tide is slowly rolling toward them. It is a moment of profound, terrifying awe. A young medic, crouching behind a snow-covered hedge, feels his breath catch in his throat. He presses his back against the frozen branches, closing his eyes for just a moment. He thinks of the small, battered tin box in his medical kit, holding a few meager rolls of bandages and a dwindling supply of morphine. He thinks of the wounded resting in the cellars behind him, relying on him to be their shield. He reaches a trembling hand into his pocket and wraps his fingers around a small, smooth stone he picked up from his driveway the day he left for training. It is his tether to the world he left behind. He squeezes the stone until his knuckles turn white, drawing a silent, steadying strength from its smooth, cold surface. He opens his eyes. He does not run. He breathes in the icy air, letting it fill his lungs, letting it cool the frantic beating of his heart. He accepts the shadow, and he stays. Down the line, a sergeant rests his hand gently on the shoulder of a trembling private. The touch is light, almost feather-soft, but it carries the weight of a heavy anchor. It says, "I see you. I know you are afraid. I am afraid, too. But we will stand here together." The young private stops trembling. He leans slightly into the reassuring touch, drawing warmth from the simple presence of another human being. He takes a deep, ragged breath and levels his gaze at the approaching silhouettes. There is no shouting. There is no dramatic rush. The defenders of Stoumont simply watch, wrapped in a quiet, agonizing stillness. They are caught in the agonizing space between the end of the waiting and the beginning of the storm. Every second stretches into an eternity. They can hear the creak of the leather harnesses on the approaching soldiers. They can hear the ice cracking beneath the immense weight of the steel tracks. They can see the pale, exhausted faces of the men walking ahead of the tanks, men who look just as cold, just as tired, and just as deeply afraid as they are. Inside the houses of Stoumont, the villagers feel the change. They do not need to look out the windows to know that the fog has lifted and that the world has arrived at their doorsteps. The vibration in the floorboards is too strong to ignore. Mothers gather their children close, pulling them onto their laps, wrapping their arms around small, trembling shoulders. They press their faces into the soft hair of their sons and daughters, breathing in the scent of them, praying for the heavy walls of their homes to hold. The elderly sit in their chairs, their hands folded quietly in their laps, their eyes closed in silent, peaceful resignation. They have seen the dark clouds of history roll over their valley before. They know that all storms, no matter how terrible, eventually pass, and that the earth will eventually find its quiet again. But for the young men standing at the edge of the village, the storm is only just beginning. The shadows in the white are no longer ghosts. They are real. They are heavy, and they are closing the distance. The ethereal beauty of the snow-covered valley is slowly being swallowed by the harsh, mechanical reality of the vanguard. The gentle, whispering pines now echo with the grinding of gears and the heavy thud of marching boots. Yet, even as the overwhelming shadow falls over their quiet outpost, the defenders do not break. They find a quiet, hidden reservoir of resilience deep within themselves. It is not born of anger or a desire for glory. It is born of love. It is born of the letters tucked securely in their breast pockets, resting against their hearts. It is born of the memory of a mother's kitchen, a father's quiet pride, a sweetheart's gentle laugh. They stand their ground not because they are fearless, but because they have things in this world that are too beautiful, too precious, to simply let go of. They hold the line in the snow, a fragile string of beating hearts, watching the dark silhouettes draw near. The snow continues to fall, large, soft flakes drifting down from the pale gray sky, landing softly on the shoulders of the boys who wait and the men who approach. The world holds its breath, suspended in a heartbreaking, beautiful sorrow, as the quiet village of Stoumont prepares to meet the shadows and the white. The silence breaks not with a roar, but with a sudden, brilliant spark that paints the frost in colors of copper and gold. In an instant, the gentle, sleeping world of Stoumont is awakened. The quiet winter afternoon is suddenly transformed into a chaotic dance of light and sound, shattering the profound peace that had settled over the valley. It is as if a sudden, violent summer thunderstorm has somehow lost its way and fallen upon the deep winter snow. The pale gray sky is suddenly punctured by brilliant, stuttering flashes, illuminating the heavy clouds from below. Down in the narrow, winding lanes of the village, the cobblestones catch the sudden bursts of light. The snow, which had been so pure and white just moments before, now reflects shades of fierce orange, deep red, and sudden, stark yellow. The ancient stone walls of the houses, the thick wooden doors, the iron-wrought gates, everything is caught in this flickering, frantic waltz. Shadows, long and sharp, leap wildly across the faces of the buildings, stretching and shrinking with every burst of illumination. It is a surreal, mesmerizing display, beautiful and terrifying all at once. But beneath the dancing lights, in the spaces between the sudden peals of thunder, there are human hearts beating with a frantic, desperate rhythm. We find a young man crouching behind a low garden wall. The stones beneath his gloved hands are covered in a thick layer of ice, biting through the wool, but he does not pull away. The air around him is filled with a deafening noise, a rushing tide of sound that threatens to overwhelm his senses. The air, which had smelled so cleanly of pine and fresh snow, is now laced with the sharp, bitter scent of sulfur and burning wood. He presses his shoulder against the cold stone, pulling his collar up around his ears. He is a long way from the quiet, rolling hills of his home, far from the familiar creak of his own front porch. In this moment of overwhelming chaos, a profound and simple fear washes over him. It is not a loud, screaming terror, but a quiet, hollow ache in the center of his chest. It is the fear of a boy who simply wants to see the sunrise again. He closes his eyes tightly, shutting out the brilliant, flashing lights. He takes a deep, ragged breath, pulling the freezing air deep into his lungs. And in the darkness behind his eyelids, he searches for an anchor. He does not find it in anger or in grand thoughts of duty. He finds it in a memory. He remembers the warmth of his family's kitchen on a Sunday morning. He can almost hear the soft, rhythmic hum of his mother humming as she flips pancakes on the cast-iron griddle. He can smell the melting butter and the sweet, rich scent of maple syrup. He pictures the sunlight streaming through the window, catching the dust motes in the air, turning them into floating gold. He wraps this memory around his trembling heart like a heavy woolen blanket. When he opens his eyes again, the chaotic dance of light is still raging around him. But something inside him has settled. His breathing slows. The frantic fluttering in his chest eases into a steady, determined drumbeat. He has found a deep, hidden well of inner strength, a quiet courage he did not know he possessed. He does not stop being afraid, but the fear no longer rules him. He grips his rifle, his hand steadying, and he stays. He stays because the memory of that warm kitchen is worth protecting. He stays because he knows the boy crouching just a few feet away is relying on him. A few yards down the lane, tucked into the recessed doorway of a small bakery, two other soldiers are huddled together. The space is tight, and their shoulders press against one another. One of them, a boy who looks too young to be wearing a uniform, is shaking uncontrollably. His teeth chatter, not just from the bitter cold, but from the sheer, overwhelming pressure of the noise and the light. His eyes are wide, fixed on the dancing shadows across the street, unable to look away. His companion, an older boy with kind, tired eyes, notices the trembling. He does not shout over the noise. He does not offer hollow reassurances or tell him to be brave. Instead, he reaches into his heavy coat pocket with a slow, deliberate movement. His fingers fumble for a moment before they find what they are looking for. He pulls out a small, slightly crushed piece of hard peppermint candy, saved from a ration pack weeks ago. He nudges the younger boy gently with his elbow. The boy flinches, tearing his eyes away from the shadows, his breathing shallow and fast. The older boy simply holds out the candy on his open palm. "Here," he whispers, his voice barely carrying over the storm. "Take it." The younger boy stares at the small, red and white striped candy for a long moment. It is such an incredibly normal, gentle thing to see in the midst of this freezing chaos. Slowly, he reaches out with a trembling hand and takes it. He slips it into his mouth. The sudden, sharp sweetness of the peppermint blooms against his tongue, a tiny explosion of flavor that cuts through the metallic taste of fear. The older boy reaches out and rests a heavy, warm hand on the younger boy's shoulder. He leaves it there, a firm, grounding pressure. "My granddad used to give me these," the older boy murmurs, leaning in close so he can be heard. "Whenever there was a bad thunderstorm back home. Said the sugar helps the heart remember it's sweet." The younger boy nods slowly. He focuses on the taste of the candy, on the solid, reassuring weight of his friend's hand on his shoulder. The shaking begins to subside. The chaotic dance of light continues to flash against the windows of the bakery, but the doorway feels a little warmer, a little safer. It is a microscopic moment of kindness, a tiny, fragile spark of humanity struck against the vast, freezing dark. But in this moment, it is everything. It is the very essence of everyday heroism, the simple, profound act of helping another soul carry their burden when the world becomes too heavy. Above them, the sky is a canvas of fleeting, unnatural light. Sudden flares hiss upwards, bursting high above the village, hanging suspended under small, drifting parachutes. They cast an eerie, brilliant glow over the valley. In the light of these flares, the falling snow takes on a magical, mesmerizing quality. The large, feathery flakes catch the bright, burning light, looking like millions of tiny, glowing embers drifting slowly down from the heavens. A young medic pauses in his movements, captivated by the sight. He is kneeling beside a stone fountain in the center of a small square, his medical bag open in the snow. For a few precious seconds, he forgets the noise. He forgets the cold. He simply watches the glowing snowfall. He watches one single flake, illuminated in brilliant, harsh white light, drift down and land gently on the frozen rim of the fountain. It sits there perfectly formed for a heartbeat, a fragile star of ice, before it melts away into the dark stone. It is a moment of impossible beauty hidden within a terrifying storm. The medic takes a deep, long breath, holding the image of that perfect, glowing snowflake in his mind. He knows that his hands will soon be needed, that his quiet courage will be tested in ways he cannot yet imagine. But that fleeting glimpse of beauty gives him a strange, profound peace. It is a reminder that even in the darkest, most chaotic moments, the world still holds onto its delicate grace. He closes his medical bag with a soft click, his spirit fortified, ready to step back into the dancing shadows. Throughout the village of Stoumont, this quiet resilience is blooming in the dark. It is not the loud, boastful courage of storybooks. It is the silent, stubborn endurance of ordinary people caught in an extraordinary storm. It is a boy from the city learning how to breathe slowly while the world shakes around him. It is a farmer's son using the gentle, soothing tones he once used to calm frightened horses to ease the panic of his best friend. It is the sharing of a dry pair of wool socks, the passing of a canteen, the silent, meaningful glances exchanged between boys who have become brothers. These young men are discovering that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the icy grip of terror in your chest, feeling the overwhelming urge to run away, and choosing, quietly and deliberately, to stay. It is the realization that they are tethered to one another by invisible threads of love and loyalty, and that they will not let those threads break. The storm rages on. The sparks continue to fly against the frost, lighting up the sleeping slates of the roofs and the frosted window panes of the village. The noise is a constant, heavy blanket pressing down on the valley. But beneath it all, the boys of Stoumont stand firm. They are no longer just waiting in the blinding white. They have found their footing in the shifting, dancing shadows. They lean against the ancient stones of the village, drawing strength from the deep, frozen earth. They hold on to their memories, their letters, their small pieces of hard candy. They hold on to each other. And as the chaotic dance of light and sound echoes through the pine trees, their inner light burns bright and steady, a quiet, beautiful defiance against the freezing, winter night. Deep below the frozen topsoil, where the ancient roots of the forest sleep, the heart of the village beats softly in the dark. Above them, the world has been given over to the bitter winter wind and the heavy, mechanical rumblings of a changing tide. But down here, beneath the thick wooden floorboards and the heavy slate tiles, the reality of the surface feels like a distant, echoing dream. The families of Stoumont have retreated into the earth. They have descended the narrow, creaking wooden stairs into their root cellars and their storage rooms. These are spaces usually reserved for jars of preserved summer berries, for sacks of heavy winter potatoes, and for dust-covered bottles of sweet apple cider. Tonight, they have become sanctuaries. The air down here is entirely different. It is cool and still, carrying the rich, deep scent of raw earth, aged timber, and dried herbs hanging from the rafters. When the ground above trembles, shivering with the weight of the passing shadows, the cellars absorb the shock. The heavy oak beams groan a low, comforting song, like the timbers of a great, sturdy ship riding out a dark storm at sea. Tiny, invisible flakes of dust drift down from the ceiling, catching the faint light before settling softly onto the dirt floors. The largest of these underground harbors is beneath the St. Edouard Sanatorium. A grand, imposing building of red brick and pale stone up on the hillside, its true strength tonight lies in its vast, vaulted basements. Here, beneath the thickest walls in the valley, dozens of souls are gathered together. The space is vast, yet it feels profoundly intimate. It is a sea of woolen blankets, heavy winter coats, and quiet, leaning bodies. The sisters of the sanatorium move among the villagers like gentle apparitions. Their long, dark habits rustle softly against the stone, a whispering sound that brings an immediate sense of peace. They carry small, flickering candles, their faces illuminated from below in a soft, golden glow that makes them look like figures in an old, beautiful painting. They do not hurry. They move with a slow, deliberate grace, offering a sip of cool water from an enamel cup, tucking a stray blanket over a sleeping child's shoulder, or simply offering a soft, reassuring smile. There is no electricity, no harsh, artificial glare to chase away the shadows. The only light comes from the candles. They are placed carefully on overturned wooden crates, on the edges of stone basins, and held loosely in tired hands. The flames are small, fragile things, teardrops of fire that lean and sway with every delicate shift in the air. But in the absolute blackness of the cellar, these tiny flames are everything. They cast a warm, amber light that softens the hard lines of worry on the adults' faces. They make the damp stone walls look like warm gold. Staring into the flame of a candle is a mesmerizing, hypnotic thing. It draws the mind away from the trembling ceiling. It pulls the thoughts inward, to a place of quiet stillness. In one corner of the sanatorium basement, nestled between two large wooden barrels, sits a young mother. She has her knees drawn up beneath a heavy, patchwork quilt, forming a safe, warm hollow. Inside this hollow rests her little boy, no older than 4. He is awake, his wide, dark eyes reflecting the dancing light of a candle burning a few feet away. He does not understand the rumbles above. To him, the world has simply shrunk down to this cozy, shadowy cave, and the absolute safety of his mother's arms. She strokes his soft hair, her fingers moving in a slow, rhythmic circle. She is humming. It is a song without words, a melody so low and soft it is felt more than heard, vibrating gently against his cheek where it rests on her chest. Inside, her own heart is racing. She is terrified for her husband who is out in the snow, for her home, for the morning that will eventually come. But she does not let a single ounce of that fear seep into her voice or her touch. She builds a fortress of calm for her son, constructing walls of soft hums and gentle strokes, ensuring that his little world remains unbroken. It is a quiet, monumental act of everyday heroism. The most powerful shield in the world is a mother's embrace in the dark. Not far from them, an elderly couple sits side by side on a narrow wooden bench. They have lived in Stoumont their entire lives. They have seen the snows come and go for 70 years. They have weathered personal storms, lost loved ones, and rebuilt their lives through sheer, quiet endurance. Now, as the earth shakes above them, they do not speak. They simply sit, their shoulders touching. The old man reaches out, his hand rough and calloused from a lifetime of working the soil, and finds his wife's hand in the dark. Her skin is thin as parchment, her fingers slightly bent with age, but her grip is surprisingly strong. They lace their fingers together, resting their joined hands on the woolen fabric of his trousers. In that simple, silent touch, an entire lifetime of devotion is communicated. It says, "I am here. We have survived before. We will survive this, together." They close their eyes, not in fear, but in a profound, shared patience. They know that the winter does not last forever and that the snow always melts. The cellar is not just a refuge for the villagers. Through the heavy wooden doors, down the stone steps, a young American soldier has been carried. He is just a boy, his uniform damp and smelling of pine needles and frost. He has been hurt, though not gravely, and the medics have placed him in the safest place they could find. He lies on a canvas stretcher, staring up at the vaulted brick ceiling, his eyes wide and lost. The shock and the cold have left him shivering, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that he cannot control. He is thousands of miles from his own mother, from his own bed, lying in the shadows of a foreign country. A woman from the village, a baker's wife who speaks no English, notices the shaking boy. She leaves her own family's huddle, carrying a thick, knitted wool blanket that smells faintly of wood smoke and dried lavender. She approaches the stretcher with slow, deliberate steps, her face calm and open. She kneels beside him on the hard dirt floor. Gently, without a word, she drapes the heavy blanket over his trembling shoulders. She tucks the edges in around him, sealing in the warmth. The young soldier looks at her, his lips parted in a silent question. She reaches into the pocket of her apron and pulls out a small, clean linen handkerchief. She dips a corner of it into a basin of cool water, wrings it out, and softly wipes the dirt and sweat from his forehead. It is a touch of pure, maternal grace. The boy closes his eyes, a single, warm tear slipping down his cheek to mingle with the cool water. He whispers a word of thanks in a language she does not know, but she understands perfectly. She rests her hand lightly on his chest, right over his beating heart, until his shivering finally begins to subside. In the dim, golden light of the cellar, there are no borders, no uniforms, no strangers. There are only human beings, keeping each other warm in the dark. Time moves differently underground. It loses its sharp edges. It is no longer measured by the ticking of a clock or the movement of the sun across the sky. Down here, time is measured by the slow pooling of melted wax beneath the candles. It is measured by the soft, rhythmic clicking of wooden rosary beads passing through withered fingers. In the quiet corners of the cellar, whispered prayers rise like a gentle vapor. The words are a soft, rhythmic murmur, an ancient cadence that acts as a balm to the weary mind. The whispers blend together, weaving a tapestry of sound that wraps around the room. It is a collective exhale, a surrendering of the things they cannot control, and a gentle holding on to hope. The repetitive, soothing nature of the prayer lulls the children into a deep, dreamless sleep. Even those who do not know the words find comfort in the steady, unbroken rhythm of the voices. As the night deepens above, the cellar grows warmer. The collective heat of so many bodies, pressed close together in the small space, pushes back the winter dampness. It becomes a womb of safety, a hidden pocket of life beneath the frozen world. The heavy thuds from the surface become muffled, distant, like the sound of a heart beating underwater. The candles burn lower, their flames sputtering softly as they reach the end of their wicks. But before one goes out, another is lit from its dying ember, passing the light along, ensuring that the darkness is never absolute. The village of Stoumont is no longer the houses on the street, or the slates on the roofs. The village is here, huddled in the warm, golden gloom. They are breathing together, waiting together, held safe within the deep, quiet embrace of the earth, dreaming of the pale light of dawn. A single step backwards is sometimes the heaviest burden a heart can carry. The tide of the winter afternoon slowly turns, and a quiet realization settles over the defenders of Stoumont. It arrives not with a sudden shout or a frantic rush, but with a gentle, heavy sigh that passes from one weary soldier to the next. The shadows moving through the white have simply grown too vast, the weight of the encroaching storm too heavy for their fragile line to hold. And so, with a profound and aching reluctance, the order is passed down through the swirling snow in soft, misty whispers. It is time to pull back. There is no panic in their movements. There is only the slow, deliberate motion of young men who have given everything they have to the frozen earth, and must now gather whatever strength remains to walk away. They lift their aching bodies from behind the low stone walls and the snow-covered hedges. They brush the thick, accumulated powder from their heavy olive-drab coats, their fingers stiff and clumsy inside their damp woolen gloves. To leave this village is to leave a place that, for a few short days, had felt like a strange and fragile home. They look back at the sturdy stone houses, the dark slate roofs holding the heavy winter snowfall, the narrow cobblestone lanes where they had stood watching the blinding mist. They remember the faint, sweet smell of wood smoke drifting from the brick chimneys. They remember the kind eyes of the village women who offered them warm cups of chicory coffee, and the shy smiles of the children peeking through the frosted window panes. To step away from these homes feels like an unraveling of a promise. One young boy, his face smudged with soot and pale with exhaustion, pauses by a wooden garden gate. Earlier that morning, before the world had fractured into chaotic light and sound, he had carefully relatched this very gate, ensuring it wouldn't swing in the winter wind. Now, he rests his gloved hand on the smooth, varnished wood one last time. He thinks of the family huddled in the dark, damp cellar below the house, wrapped in their patchwork quilts, listening to the trembling earth. He cannot speak to them. He cannot tell them that he is sorry, that he is leaving the shelter of their garden. So, he leaves the apology in the wood. He presses his hand firmly against the gate, a silent, heartbroken vow left behind in the falling snow. "We are not abandoning you," the touch says. "We are only catching our breath." The journey to the edge of the town is not measured in miles, but in the agonizing, rhythmic lifting of heavy boots. The snow, which had seemed so beautiful and pure when they first arrived, is now a deep, dragging ocean. Every step requires a conscious, monumental effort. You lift the knee, you push through the resistance of the heavy drifts, you place the foot down, and you shift your weight. Then, you ask your exhausted body to do it all over again. The sound of their retreat is a mesmerizing, mournful lullaby. It is the squeak and crunch of hundreds of boots pressing into packed powder. It is the rhythmic, ragged breathing of tired men, their breath rising in great white plumes that mingle and drift up into the pale gray sky. The cold has seeped past their wool, past their skin, settling deep into their bones. It is a numbing, heavy ache that makes their limbs feel like lead. To keep moving, their minds begin to drift, detaching from the biting wind and the frozen landscape. They walk in a waking dream. A soldier near the front of the line closes his eyes for just a few seconds as he walks, letting the sound of his brother's footsteps guide him. He retreats into the warmest corner of his memory. He is no longer trudging through a Belgian forest. He is walking down the dirt road leading to his family's farm in the late summer heat. He can feel the warm sun on his shoulders. He can hear the rhythmic hum of the cicadas in the tall grass. He can smell the sweet, earthy scent of the tomato vines in his mother's garden. He holds onto this vision with desperate strength, letting the phantom warmth of a July afternoon push him through the freezing December twilight. They do not walk alone. In the midst of this profound exhaustion, the quiet, unbreakable bonds of brotherhood become their salvation. A few paces back, a young private stumbles. His foot catches on a hidden root beneath the snow, and his knees buckle. He does not fall completely, but he stops, his head dropping to his chest, his reserves utterly empty. He simply cannot take another step. The snow looks so incredibly soft. It would be so easy to just lie down, to let the winter wrap its heavy, white blanket around him, to finally sleep. Before he can sink into the drift, a firm arm wraps around his waist. It is his friend, an older boy with a quiet demeanor and a steady heart. The older boy does not say a word. He simply slides his shoulder under the younger boy's arm, taking half of his weight onto himself. He leans in close, their heavy coats pressing together, sharing what little body heat they have left. "I've got you," he whispers, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "Just lean on me. We're going to walk together." And so they do. They move as a single, weary entity, perfectly in sync, a beautiful, tragic monument to human devotion. They are boys who have lost everything but each other, and they find that it is enough. It is the purest form of everyday heroism. It is not about grand gestures or triumphant victories. It is about refusing to let the boy next to you fall into the snow. As they near the edge of the village, where the cultivated fields give way to the wild, imposing line of the ancient pine forest, the soldiers reach into their pockets. With numb, trembling fingers, they touch the letters they carry. The thin, folded papers are crisp with the cold, but they are still there, resting safely against their chests. For one young man, the letter is from a sweetheart he married just weeks before shipping out. He traces the outline of the envelope through the thick wool of his coat. He thinks of the life they planned, the small apartment they rented, the color of the curtain she chose. Every step backwards, away from the village, feels like a step further away from that life, from that future. But he knows, with a quiet, undeniable certainty, that he must survive this winter to get back to her. The letter is his compass. It points his heart toward home, even as his boots march toward the shadows of the forest. They cross the final line of snow-covered hedges, leaving the village of Stoumont behind them. The trees of the Ardennes loom ahead, tall and dark, their branches heavy with ice. Here, at the edge of the woods, the order is given to halt. They have reached their new line. They turn around, facing the way they came. The village rests in the distance, partially obscured by the gentle, continuous snowfall. The stone houses look like silent, steadfast guardians in the fading light. The smoke still drifts lazily from a few chimneys, a heartbreaking reminder of the life continuing beneath the trembling earth. The defenders stand shoulder to shoulder among the trees, leaning against the rough bark of the pines. They are utterly depleted. Their faces are hollowed by exhaustion, their eyes red and tired. But as they look back at the village they swore to protect, there is no defeat in their posture. They are overwhelmed, but they are entirely unbroken. They look at the long, winding trail of footprints they have left in the deep snow. The tracks map their reluctant journey, a visible scar across the pristine white fields. But already, the winter is working to heal the landscape. The large, feathery flakes continue to fall, drifting down to gently fill the impressions. The edges of the footprints soften. The dark earth at the bottom of the tracks is covered in a fresh layer of white. Slowly, silently, the path is being erased. To the young men watching, this is not a loss of history, but a quiet, beautiful promise. The snow may cover their retreat, but it cannot erase their resolve. They stand in the freezing twilight, catching their breath, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of their hearts returning. They look at the village, at the slate roofs and the warm, hidden cellars. They do not speak it aloud, for the forest is too quiet and their voices are too tired, but the vow echoes loudly in the spaces between them. They will rest. They will gather their strength in the shadows of the pines. And when the time is right, they will turn back. The footprints may vanish, but the love that tethered them to those stone houses remains. The valley breathes a long, cold sigh, wrapping the weary soldiers in its dark, protective arms, as they stand watch at the edge of the world, holding onto a silent promise in the snow. The darkness does not fall all at once, it rises from the frozen earth, a quiet tide that slowly swallows the fading light until the world is painted only in shades of deep, winter midnight. Stoumont is no longer a village of unbroken homes and peaceful hearths. It is a place divided, a fractured reflection of the world beyond the valley. As the last pale streaks of gray bleed out of the western sky, the true weight of the winter night descends. Up above, there is no comfort to be found in the heavens. A thick, seamless ceiling of iron-gray clouds has rolled over the Ardennes, pressing down upon the ancient pines. The stars are completely obscured. There is no silver moonlight to guide the eye, no gentle constellations to offer a sense of scale or navigation. There is only a vast, heavy canopy of blackness, isolating the valley from the rest of the universe. In the woods just beyond the village edge, the young American soldiers settle into the freezing shadows. They have dug shallow scrapes in the unyielding, frost-locked earth, their hands blistered and raw from the effort. Now, there is nothing left to do but wait and shiver. The cold is a living, breathing entity tonight. It does not simply chill the skin, it searches for the marrow. It slips beneath the heavy wool of their coats, it finds the spaces between their knitted scarves, and it wraps its icy fingers around their tired hearts. In a small, dark hollow beneath the sweeping branches of a massive fir tree, two boys huddle together. They have pooled their meager resources, draping a single, thin canvas shelter half over their shoulders to create a tiny tent against the biting wind. Beneath the canvas, they sit shoulder to shoulder, their knees pulled tight to their chests. One boy is from a sprawling farm in the Midwest, a place of wide-open skies and golden wheat. The other is a city kid, raised amidst the clatter of streetcars and the towering brick facades of the East Coast. Tonight, those differences mean nothing. They are bound by the simple, profound need for another human heartbeat. "You awake?" the city boy whispers, his voice barely a rasp. "Yeah," comes the soft, trembling reply. "Can't sleep. Too cold." "Think about the warmest place you know," the first boy murmurs, shifting slightly to share more of his body heat. "Just put your mind there." The farm boy closes his eyes in the pitch black. The hayloft. In August. Right under the tin roof. Smells like dust and dry grass, and it's so hot you can hardly breathe. But it's safe. "Hold on to that," his friend whispers back. "Don't let it go." This is the quiet resilience of the night. It is the ability to transport the soul away from the suffering of the body, to find a sanctuary in the delicate architecture of memory. But this longing for warmth, this desperate reaching for home, is not confined to the woods. Inside the village, among the shadowed, broken shells of the houses, the young men of the German vanguard are fighting the very same battle against the dark. They are not the faceless, mechanical shadows that rolled out of the fog earlier in the day. Now, with the engines silenced and the chaotic light extinguished, they are revealed to be just as young, just as cold, and just as deeply exhausted as the boys hiding in the trees. A young German soldier, his uniform damp and stiff with frozen snow, steps carefully into the ruins of what used to be a local bakery. The roof has partially caved in, allowing the bitter wind to swirl through the shattered timbers. He finds a relatively sheltered corner behind the remnants of a stone oven and sinks to the floor. His limbs feel impossibly heavy. He pulls off his thick gloves. Blowing warm breath into his cupped hands, trying to coax the feeling back into his numb fingertips. As his eyes adjust to the profound darkness, his hand brushes against something soft on the floor. It is not a piece of stone or a splinter of wood. He picks it up carefully. His fingers trace the shape in the dark, a small, stuffed woolen bear, its button eyes missing, its fabric worn smooth by the affectionate grip of a child. The young soldier goes entirely still. The breath catches in his throat. He is thousands of miles from his own home, swept up in a vast, terrible current he cannot control, but in his hands, he holds the undeniable proof of the life that was interrupted here. He thinks of his own younger sister, safe in a city far away, who sleeps with a similar toy tucked beneath her chin. A profound, aching sorrow washes over him. He does not throw the toy aside. Instead, he gently brushes the plaster dust from its soft ears and tucks it safely onto a high shelf, out of the debris, a silent apology offered to a child he will never meet. It is a moment of pure, heartbreaking humanity, a realization that the men shivering in the ruins and the men shivering in the woods are all trapped beneath the same starless sky. Night in the Ardennes is a time of profound questioning. When the noise of the day fades, the silence rushes in to fill the void, and the silence is full of voices. The soldiers look out into the impenetrable blackness, and they wonder about their fates. They are so incredibly young to be grappling with the fragile nature of their own existence. They realize, with a sudden, startling clarity, how easily a life can be snuffed out, like a candle left unguarded in the winter wind. To combat this encroaching dread, they turn to the pieces of paper resting over their hearts. No one can light a match tonight. A single spark would draw the eyes of the hidden watchers. So, The letters from home remain folded in their breast pockets. But they do not need to be read to be understood. In the snowy trench at the edge of the woods, a young American presses his hand flat against his chest, right over the pocket holding a letter from his mother. He knows every word, every loop of her handwriting, every smudge of ink. He recites it in his mind, a silent, rhythmic prayer. My dearest son, the snow is falling here today, just like you said it does over there. Your father fixed the porch step, and the dog waits by the door for you every afternoon. Across the divided space, in the drafty cellar of a ruined Stoumont home, a German boy does the exact same thing. He touches a folded note from his sweetheart, reciting the words that tether him to the world of the living. I am knitting you a thick sweater. I pray every night that it finds you warm, and that you find your way back to me when the spring comes. 2 boys. 2 letters. 2 hearts beating in the freezing dark, anchored to the earth by the very same kind of love. The language is different, the uniforms are different, but the longing is identical. They are 2 halves of the same human tragedy, separated by a few hundred yards of snow and a world of misunderstanding. As midnight approaches, the temperature continues to plummet. The moisture in the air freezes, creating a delicate, sparkling frost that coats the pine needles, the broken stones of the village, and the woolen shoulders of the sleeping boys. The valley of the Meuse River is locked in a deep, crystalline slumber. The silence is vast and absolute. It is the silence of a world holding its breath. The earth does not tremble now. The wind has died down to a faint, ghostly whisper. Even the Meuse River seems to have slowed its rushing current, its dark waters sliding silently beneath a thickening layer of ice. In this quiet, suspended hour, there is no war. There is only the endurance of the human spirit. There is the farm boy dreaming of the hot summer hayloft. There is the German boy guarding a stranger's woolen bear. There are the mothers and the fathers, the sweethearts and the sisters, separated by oceans and continents, looking up at the sky and praying for the same, simple miracle, that the boys they love will see the morning light. The stars remain obscured, hidden behind the heavy, unyielding clouds. But perhaps it is better this way. Without the vast, indifferent gaze of the cosmos staring down at them, the valley feels a little smaller, a little more intimate. The soldiers on both sides of the line pull their collars up, pull their friends closer, and close their eyes. They drift into a shallow, fitful sleep, suspended in the dark, fragile and brave, wrapped in the silent, freezing embrace of the long winter night. In the deepest hours of the winter night, there is a gentle magic in the hands of those who refuse to let the iron sleep. Miles away from the quiet, divided village of Stoumont, where the young defenders shiver in the snowy woods, a different kind of vigil is being kept. Here, tucked away beneath the heavy canopy of the Ardennes, sits an old, cavernous stone barn. Its grand wooden doors are pulled tightly shut, and thick, heavy tarps have been draped over the high, narrow windows to trap the light inside. To the outside world, it is just another shadow in the dark forest. But inside, the air is thick with a desperate, quiet purpose. This is a sanctuary for the broken. It is a place where discarded, wounded giants of steel are brought to rest. Beneath the soft, flickering glow of shielded lanterns, the massive silhouettes of damaged tanks sit in the gloom. They are covered in a thin layer of frost, their olive drab paint scarred and blackened by the harsh realities of the winter roads. They look like great, sleeping beasts, their heavy tracks silent, their engines cold. To anyone else, they are ruined things, empty shells left behind by the shifting tides of the world. But to the men moving quietly through the shadows of the barn, they are something else entirely. They are a promise waiting to be kept. These men are not the infantry. They do not carry rifles or stand watch at the edge of the freezing woods. They are the mechanics, the engineers, the quiet tinkerers of the rear echelon. They wear heavy, grease-stained overalls that offer little protection against the deep, seeping cold of the stone floor. Their hands are perpetually darkened with oil and soot, the skin calloused, rough, and cracked from the bitter wind. Back home, in a world that feels like a fading dream, these men were the keepers of everyday life. They were the watchmakers peering through magnifying glasses in quiet storefronts. They were the farmers fixing broken plowshares in the autumn rain. They were the boys who spent their summer evenings lying on their backs beneath old, rusting cars, learning the gentle language of gears and belts. Now, they have brought their quiet, patient trades to the edge of the winter forest. The cold inside the barn is absolute. It turns the heavy steel of the machines into blocks of ice. To touch a wrench with a bare hand is to risk tearing the skin, a sharp, burning reminder of the winter's bite. Yet, the heavy woolen gloves they were issued are too clumsy, too thick for the delicate, intimate work of finding a stripped thread or a fractured fuel line. And so, they work with bare hands, stopping every few minutes to blow warm air into their cupped palms, rubbing their stiff fingers together to keep the blood flowing. They move around the sleeping metal beasts with a slow, deliberate grace. There is a strange, tender intimacy in their work. They treat the broken machines not as objects, but as wounded creatures entrusted to their care. A young mechanic, his face smudged with dark grease, leans his head against the cold steel hull of a tank. He closes his eyes and listens, running his hand gently along the welded seams, feeling for the hidden fractures. He whispers to it, a soft, encouraging murmur, coaxing the metal to hold together for just one more journey. This is a story of profound ingenuity born of pure love. They do not have a warehouse of new parts to draw from. They are working with the discarded, the forgotten, the broken. They are scavengers of hope. In one corner of the barn, an older mechanic is cannibalizing a shattered engine block, carefully extracting a single, pristine valve. He moves with the precision of a surgeon, his breath pluming in the cold air. He knows that this one small piece of unseen metal, cleaned and polished and placed into the heart of another machine, might be the difference between silence and survival. He wipes the valve clean with a frayed cotton rag, treating it as if it were a precious jewel. Suddenly, the dim gloom of the barn is pierced by a brilliant, sputtering light. It is the hiss and flare of a welding torch. The intense, blue-white flame throws long, dancing shadows against the ancient stone walls, turning the barn into a flickering theater of light. Sparks cascade down like a shower of tiny, fleeting fireflies, bouncing harmlessly off the damp dirt floor before fading back into the dark. The heat from the torch is a sudden, localized blessing. The mechanic holding it leans into the warmth, his eyes protected by the dark glass of his heavy mask. He is fusing two torn pieces of iron together, sealing a wound in the armor. As he works, his mind drifts away from the freezing barn. He remembers standing in his father's blacksmith shop when he was just a boy, watching the glowing iron bend over the anvil. He remembers the smell of the coal fire, the rhythmic, musical ringing of the hammer, and the quiet pride in his father's eyes when a piece of work was finally done. He channels that memory, that ancient, familiar pride, into the tip of his welding torch. He is binding the metal not just with heat, but with a deep, unbroken lineage of care. Why do they push themselves so hard in the dead of night? Why do they strip the skin from their knuckles and ache in the freezing damp? Because they know what is happening out there in the dark. Earlier in the day, they had felt the low, heavy rumbles echoing through the pine trees. They had heard the distant thunder rolling down the valley from Stoumont. They know that a few miles away, boys just like them, boys they shared cigarettes and stories with just a week ago, are shivering in the snow, waiting for the dawn. They know those boys are looking out into the blinding white, feeling the crushing weight of the shadows, and hoping for a miracle. The mechanics cannot give them the sun to warm their shoulders. They cannot give them a ticket home. But they can give them iron. They can give them a shield. And so, every turned screw, every patched hose, every drop of oil poured into the dark engines is a quiet, desperate prayer for a stranger's safe return. In the middle of the night, a brief pause is called. The men gather around a small, shielded kerosene heater in the center of the barn. An old, dented thermos is passed around the circle. It holds coffee made hours ago, tasting bitter and metallic, but it is warm, and tonight, warmth is the greatest luxury in the world. They hold the small tin cups in their blackened hands, letting the heat seep into their aching joints. They do not talk of the war. They talk of the things that make them human. A boy from a small town in Michigan talks about his old Chevrolet. He describes, with loving detail, how he rebuilt the carburetor on his front porch while his mother scolded him for bringing the smell of gasoline into the house. He smiles, a flash of white teeth and a grease-stained face, as he remembers the first time the engine turned over, the triumphant roar that echoed down his quiet suburban street. The older men listen, nodding slowly. They understand. They share their own stories of stubborn tractors, of clocks that wouldn't tick, of the simple, profound satisfaction of taking something broken and making it whole again. In these shared stories, they find a deep well of resilience. They are reminding themselves of who they are. They are not just soldiers trapped in a freezing forest, they are builders, creators, fixers of the world. One of the men reaches into the pocket of his overalls. His fingers brush against a folded letter. He pulls it out carefully, trying not to smudge the delicate paper with his oily thumbs. It is from his wife, written in a soft, flowing script that smells faintly of talcum powder. He doesn't read it aloud, he just traces the outline of his name on the envelope. He thinks of his own son, asleep in a warm bed thousands of miles away. He looks around the barn at the cold steel and the tired faces of his friends. He maps the fierce, protective love he feels for his own child onto the strangers waiting in the snow at Stoumont. He carefully tucks the letter back against his heart, and he stands up. The break is over. There is still work to be done. Slowly, agonizingly, the fractured pieces are brought together. The scavenged parts are fitted perfectly into place. The final bolts are tightened with a heavy, satisfying groan of metal against metal. Thick, dark oil is poured into the thirsty engines, a lifeblood returning to the dry veins of the machine. It is time. The young crew members, boys whose faces are pale with exhaustion and a quiet, lingering fear, step out of the shadows. They have been waiting patiently, resting against the stone walls while the healers worked. Now, they climb up the cold metal sides of the tank, their boots slipping slightly on the frosted armor. They drop down through the heavy steel hatches, slipping into the dark, cramped belly of the beast. The older mechanic steps back. He wipes his hands on a filthy rag, leaving streaks of black grease across the gray fabric. He looks at the iron giant he has spent the night piecing back together. He gives a small, almost imperceptible nod to the driver waiting inside. The silence of the barn holds its breath. The driver turns the ignition. At first, there is only a high, mechanical whine, a struggling sound that makes the mechanic's hearts drop. The engine coughs, a harsh, jagged metallic rasp that echoes off the stone walls. A thick plume of dark exhaust shoots out of the pipes, rising up into the wooden rafters. The mechanic closes his eyes, whispering a silent plea. "Come on. Please." The starter whines again. And then, it catches. It does not roar, it rumbles. It is a deep, steady, rhythmic thrum that vibrates through the soles of their boots and resonates in the center of their chests. The great iron heart begins to beat. The sound is beautiful. It is the most musical, triumphant sound in the world. It is the sound of resurrection, of pure, undeniable survival. The heavy steel tracks squeak and settle as the power flows through the machine. The giant has awakened from the ashes. The heavy wooden doors of the barn are slowly pushed open, groaning on their iron hinges. The freezing night air rushes in, carrying the soft, swirling flakes of the winter snow. The pale light of the hidden moon reflects off the white ground outside. The patched-up tank slowly rolls forward. Its gears grind with a heavy, slow determination. It crosses the threshold of the barn, its exhaust mingling with the falling snow, creating a ghostly white cloud around the rear hull. The mechanics stand in the open doorway, the bitter wind biting at their faces, and they watch it go. They do not cheer. They do not wave. They stand in quiet, profound reverence. They watch the dark silhouette of the machine disappear into the tree line, heading toward the valley, carrying their hopes, their sleepless hours, and their quiet pride into the dark. They stand there until the sound of the engine fades into the whisper of the pines. Then, they turn around. They walk back into the dim, flickering light of the barn. They pick up their cold, heavy wrenches. They move toward the next broken shadow resting in the gloom. The night is still long, and the winter is deep. But in this quiet corner of the forest, the fire of human ingenuity burns bright and steady, fixing the unfixable, breathing life into the cold earth, and sending iron from the ashes to protect the boys waiting for the dawn. The longest nights do not end with a sudden burst of glory, but with a quiet, fragile softening of the dark. Morning in the Ardennes forest arrives with a profound and heavy reluctance. The sun does not rise, it merely suggests itself, a pale, watery smudge struggling to pierce the thick, unyielding ceiling of winter clouds. The sky shifts from the deep, impenetrable charcoal of midnight to a bruised and muted gray. It is a quiet, breathless hour. The air is so cold it feels brittle, as if a sudden sound might shatter the world into a million sparkling pieces of ice. At the edge of the woods, where the deep drifts meet the line of ancient pine trees, the young American defenders begin to stir. They have survived the dark. They rise from their shallow scrapes in the frozen earth, moving with an agonizing slowness. Their bodies are stiff, their joints aching with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Frost coats the shoulders of their heavy olive-drab coats, turning them into pale, ghostly statues slowly coming back to life. Their eyelashes are heavy with ice, and their breath rises in slow, deliberate clouds of white steam. There is no morning bugle here. There is only the soft, rhythmic crunch of boots shifting in the snow and the quiet murmurs of boys checking on one another. A young private leans against the rough bark of a towering fir tree, his hands tucked deep beneath his armpits in a desperate attempt to find a lingering pocket of warmth. He looks at his friend, who is meticulously brushing the accumulated snow from the bolt of his rifle. Neither of them speaks for a long time. They just share a look of quiet, enduring survival. They have made it through the longest night of their lives. "You make it to morning, Tommy," the private whispers, a faint, tired smile touching the corners of his pale lips. His friend does not look up from his work, but his shoulders relax just a fraction. "I'm here," he murmurs back, his voice thick with cold and sleep. "Still here." It is a small victory, but in this frozen landscape, it is everything. To stand up, to brush the snow from your knees, to take another breath of the freezing air, these are monumental acts of quiet defiance. They are fueled not by anger, but by a deep, beautiful reservoir of hope. Before he fully joins the morning, the young private takes a moment for himself. With clumsy, numb fingers, he unbuttons the top of his heavy coat and reaches inside. He touches the folded square of paper resting in his breast pocket. It is a letter from his father, a man of few words who had spent his life working the soil of a quiet Midwestern farm. The boy knows the words by heart. He does not need the pale morning light to read them. "Keep your head down, son. Do what is right. We are leaving the porch light on for you every single night until you walk back up the driveway." He presses his hand against the paper, feeling the faint, rhythmic beating of his own heart beneath it. He draws strength from that imaginary porch light, letting its warm, golden glow push back the great chill of the Belgian morning. He rebuttons his coat, his jaw setting with a new, quiet resolve. He is ready. And then, the silence of the winter dawn is broken. It begins as a vibration, a faint trembling in the frozen earth that travels up through the soles of their boots. The young men freeze, their tired eyes darting toward the misty fields that separate them from the village of Stoumont. Have the shadows returned? Is the storm beginning again? But the rhythm is different. It does not come from the village ahead, it comes from the winding forest road behind them. It is not the harsh, metallic clatter of the enemy. It is a low, steady, resonant thrum. It is the sound of heavy engines working with a familiar, mechanical heartbeat. Slowly, out of the pale mist drifting between the trees, the silhouettes emerge. They are American tanks. They do not look like the pristine, terrifying machines of war posters. They look like weary, battered travelers who have walked 1,000 miles through the snow. Their olive drab paint is scarred and blackened. There are heavy, uneven welds on their steel hulls, the proud scars of the midnight mechanics who refused to let them die. They wear thick chains on their tracks to grip the ice, and their massive forms are dusted with the fresh morning snow. To the boys standing at the edge of the woods, they are the most beautiful sight in the world. The low rumble of the engines is a warm, enveloping sound. It is the sound of a promise kept. The boys in the snow know that miles away, in the dark hours of the night, someone stayed awake for them. Someone scraped their knuckles, burned their fingers, and pieced these broken giants back together so that they would not have to face the morning alone. A collective, silent exhale passes through the infantrymen. Shoulders drop. The hollow ache in their chests is suddenly filled with a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. A young soldier steps forward, his boots sinking deep into the powder. He walks right up to the side of the lead tank as it idles in the snow. He reaches out a trembling hand and rests it flat against the cold, iron hull. The metal vibrates beneath his palm, humming with life and power. It is freezing to the touch, but to the boy, it feels like the warmest hearth he has ever known. It is an anchor. It is a shield. Inside the steel belly of the machine, the world is cramped, dark, and smelling sharply of diesel and hot oil. The driver, a young man with grease smudged across his forehead and dark circles under his eyes, peers out through the narrow viewing slit. He sees the infantryman resting his hand on the hull. He sees the exhaustion in the boy's posture, the frost on his collar, the fragile youth in his eyes. The driver rests his hands lightly on the heavy steering levers. He is just as tired. He has not slept in days. His mind drifts to his younger brother back in Chicago, a boy with the same slight build and the same nervous habit of chewing his bottom lip. A fierce, protective warmth blooms in the driver's chest. He cannot reach out and put an arm around the boy in the snow. He cannot offer him a warm cup of coffee or a dry blanket. But he can offer him this 3-ton wall of patched-up steel. He makes a silent, unwavering vow. I will not leave you. I will walk with you into the dark, and I will be your shield. The gentle rumble of the engines seems to synchronize with the beating of their hearts. The arrival of the armor is not a call for a dramatic, sweeping charge. There are no bugles, no shouts of glory. It is simply a quiet gathering of strength, a pooling of human resolve. The pale light of the dawn slowly begins to define the edges of the world. The village of Stoumont lies ahead, its slate roofs barely visible through the falling snow, its stone houses holding the quiet, waiting families in their cellars. The footprints the young men left behind in their retreat yesterday are mostly filled in now, smoothed over by the gentle forgiveness of the winter night. But the path remains in their hearts. The order is passed down the line, not as a shout, but as a soft murmur traveling from man to man. It is time to go back. The boys in the snow adjust the slings of their rifles. They pull their woolen scarves up a little higher around their faces. They look at each other, sharing small, imperceptible nods. They are guided by a force far stronger than orders or strategy. They are guided by a profound, unbreakable brotherhood. They step forward because the boy to their left is stepping forward, and the boy to their right is doing the same. The great iron tracks of the tanks squeak and groan as they begin to roll forward, crushing the fresh snow beneath their immense weight. They move slowly, matching the pace of the weary infantrymen. They do not race ahead, they act as patient, lumbering guardians, keeping their white steel bodies between the boys and the unknown. The young soldiers fall in beside them. They walk close to the rear of the tanks, where the thick, dark exhaust pipes push out waves of glorious, beautiful heat. The warm air washes over their freezing faces, melting the frost on their eyelashes, a small, mechanical blessing in the bitter cold. They press their shoulders close to the moving metal, moving as a single, symbiotic organism. The machine provides the shield and the warmth, the men provide the eyes, the heart, and the soul. They walk back into the fray with a heartbreaking, beautiful dignity. It is a slow, deliberate march through the deep drifts. The fear is still there, resting quietly in the bottom of their stomachs, but it is no longer in control. It has been replaced by love. Love for the brothers walking beside them, love for the faces waiting in the photographs tucked into their pockets, and love for the quiet village they swore to protect. The snow continues to fall, large, soft flakes that drift down from the pale gray sky. The woods are silent, save for the low, steady rumble of the engines and the rhythmic crunch of boots. As the sun struggles in vain to pierce the winter clouds, the men of Stoumont create their own light. It is a light born of shared burden, of quiet courage, and of the simple, everyday heroism of putting one frozen foot in front of the other, walking back into the shadows for the sake of a friend. The dawn's pale light washes over them as they leave the safety of the trees, a fragile line of warmth and beating hearts moving slowly, steadily, and beautifully back into the winter storm. Even the deepest winter must eventually yield to the quiet, stubborn warmth of a single, beating heart. The village of Stoumont, held fast in the grip of ice and shadow, begins to feel a subtle, almost imperceptible change in the air. It does not come with a sudden rise in temperature or a breaking of the heavy gray clouds. The sky remains a pale, bruised canopy, and the snow continues its slow, silent descent. But down in the winding, cobblestone lanes, the frozen stillness is cracking. The momentum of the world is shifting, turning on the axis of quiet human resolve. The young American defenders have returned. They walk alongside the patched-up iron giants that the midnight mechanics breathed back to life. They do not rush the village with loud, echoing shouts. They move with a deliberate, agonizing slowness, a tide of olive-drab wool and steamy breath rolling back into the streets they had so reluctantly left behind. Every step forward is a monumental effort, a pushing against the immense, invisible weight of the winter and the fear that still rests quietly in the bottoms of their stomachs. But the fear no longer guides them. It has been replaced by a quiet, unwavering devotion. They are reclaiming the village not for glory, or for lines on a map that mean nothing to boys from the plains of the Midwest or the crowded avenues of the eastern cities. They are reclaiming it for the hidden cellars. They are moving forward for the sake of the families huddled beneath the floorboards, for the grandmothers knitting in the dark, and for the children who pressed their small, hopeful faces against the frosted window panes just a few days ago. We find the young soldier who, during the retreat, had rested his hand on a varnished wooden garden gate, leaving a silent apology in the wood. He is back. His boots crunch softly in the deep snow as he walks past that very same gate. He does not stop this time, but as he passes, he brushes his heavy woolen glove against the top of the wood. It is a fleeting touch, a quiet completion of the promise he made in the twilight. We told you we would return, the touch whispers into the freezing air. We are here. Reclaiming the village inch by agonizing inch requires 1,000 small, unseen acts of sacrifice. The true turning of the tide is not found in grand maneuvers, but in the gentle, everyday heroism of boys looking out for one another in the bitter cold. As they move up a narrow, sloping lane, the wind picks up, howling through the stone corridors of the town. It bites through their coats, seeking the warmth of their skin. Behind one of the idling, rumbling tanks, there is a small pocket of glorious heat where the dark exhaust pours out into the snow. It is a tiny, mechanical hearth in the middle of a frozen wasteland. A young private, his face hollowed by exhaustion and his lips tinged with blue, has been walking in that warm pocket. The heat has melted the ice on his eyelashes and chased the worst of the shivers from his spine. But he looks over his shoulder and sees a friend, a boy no older than 18, stumbling slightly in the deep drifts, his shoulders hunched tight against the biting wind. The private does not hesitate. He does not complain. He steps out of the warm envelope of the exhaust, moving back into the stinging, freezing air. He gently takes his friend by the arm and pulls him forward, guiding him into the coveted spot behind the iron machine. "Take a minute," the private whispers, his own breath instantly turning to thick white steam. "Get your hands warm." His friend looks at him, eyes wide with a quiet, overwhelming gratitude. He nods, holding his raw, bare hands up to the dark, warm air flowing from the engine. The private walks beside him, shivering again, the bitter cold returning to his bones. But inside his chest, a different kind of warmth blooms. It is the profound, beautiful warmth of pure selflessness. He has given away his only comfort, and in doing so, he has made the heavy burden of the winter just a little bit lighter for someone he loves. These are the quiet sacrifices that slowly turn the wheel of fate. Further down the street, near the ruins of a small stone bakery, the shadows are retreating. The young men of the German vanguard, just as exhausted, just as frozen, realize that the tide has turned. They, too, are driven by a deep longing for home, a desire to survive the bitter winter and see the faces of their families again. They do not run. They withdraw slowly, melting back into the gray mist and the deep pines, leaving the village to the quiet footfalls of the advancing Americans. As one young German soldier steps back from a snow-covered doorway, he reaches into his heavy coat. He pulls out a small, hard piece of rationed bread, wrapped in a scrap of paper. He looks down at the ground. Huddled in the corner of the doorway, shivering and confused by the shifting world, is a small, scruffy village dog. The dog looks up, its dark eyes full of innocent, quiet pleading. The soldier pauses. He is hungry. He has not eaten a warm meal in days. But he looks at the animal, a fragile, trembling piece of life caught in the middle of a human storm. He unwraps the bread, breaks it cleanly in half, and places one piece gently on the snow near the dog's paws. He wraps the other half and puts it back in his pocket. He does not say a word. He simply turns and walks away into the falling snow, leaving behind a tiny, beautiful spark of kindness in the ruins. Beneath the trembling earth, in the damp, vaulted cellars of the St. Edward Sanatorium and the stone basements of the village homes, the families of Stoumont are listening. For hours, they have huddled in the golden, flickering light of their candles, holding their breath, waiting for the storm above to pass. They know the language of the floorboards. They can feel the vibrations in the dirt. And as the morning wears on, an elderly grandmother, her hands resting quietly on her woolen lap, tilts her head. She closes her eyes, focusing her entire being on the sounds bleeding down through the ceiling. The heavy, mechanical groans of the tanks are returning, but they are moving differently. They are not rolling away toward the dark forest, they are rolling back into the center of the village. And beneath the rumble of the engines, there is a softer, more rhythmic sound. It is the steady, synchronized crunch of hundreds of heavy boots stepping together. She opens her eyes. She looks at her daughter, who is rocking a sleeping child in her arms. They are coming back, the grandmother whispers, her voice trembling, delicate as a dry autumn leaf. A collective sigh washes through the cellar. It is not a cheer, but a deep, profound release of held breath. The heavy, suffocating dread that had settled over them begins to lift. Mothers pull their children a little closer, burying their faces in soft hair, weeping silent, gentle tears of relief. The old men nod to one another, their weathered faces softening in the dim candlelight. The dark, frightening world above is being reclaimed by the boys who shared their coffee, the boys who fixed their garden gates, the boys who carried the warmth of distant homes in their pockets. Up on the surface, the American soldiers continue their slow, deliberate march. The snow is falling heavier now, a thick, white curtain that muffles the sound of their boots and turns the village into a soft, dreamlike painting. They walk past the snow-covered hedges and the low stone walls. They touch the letters tucked securely in their breast pockets. The crisp, folded papers are their compasses, pointing their hearts toward the places where they are deeply, truly loved. One boy recites the words of his sweetheart's letter in his mind, matching the syllables to the rhythm of his footsteps. I am waiting for you. The apple tree in the yard is sleeping under the snow, but it will bloom again. And you will be here to see it. He repeats the promise over and over, letting it push him forward. The freezing air bites at his cheeks, but he does not feel it. He is walking through the winter, but his soul is living in the spring. He is carrying the promise of the blooming apple tree through the streets of Stoumont, offering its unseen warmth to the frozen landscape. This is the melting of the ice. It is not a physical thawing of the snow, for the winter still holds the Ardennes in a tight, unyielding grip. The icicles still hang like glass from the slate roofs, and the Meuse River still runs dark and cold beneath its frozen shell. But within the hearts of the men and women in the valley, a profound thaw has begun. The paralyzing grip of isolation and fear is giving way to the gentle, flowing currents of hope and reunion. The defenders reach the center square of the village. The great oak tree stands bare and silent, its heavy branches coated in a thick layer of white. The soldiers come to a halt. They lean against the cold iron hulls of their tanks, their chests heaving, their breath rising in great clouds of steam. They are exhausted beyond measure. Their bodies ache, and their eyes are heavy with the deep, pulling weight of sleep. But as they look around the quiet, snow-covered square, a profound peace settles over them. They have done what they promised to do. They have walked back into the dark, and they have brought the light with them. The village is quiet again. It is not the eerie, terrifying silence of an approaching storm, but the soft, settling hush of a safe harbor. The snow continues to fall, patient and pure, covering the scars of the morning, burying the heavy tracks of the machines, and wrapping the world in a beautiful, unbroken blanket of white. The young men stand in the snow, surrounded by the sturdy stone houses, and they finally allow themselves to rest. They close their tired eyes, listening to the gentle whisper of the wind through the pines. The ice within them has melted, leaving behind a deep, quiet river of resilience, flowing smoothly and softly toward the promise of a peaceful tomorrow. The heaviest locks are not made of iron, but of falling snow and profound, unbroken silence. Deep within the ancient, sweeping forests of the Ardennes, a quiet and heavy truth begins to settle over the valley. The great, mechanical tide that had pushed its way through the winter mist, grinding over the frost and shattering the quiet of the morning, has finally come to a halt. The German vanguard, a sprawling line of heavy armor and exhausted men, has reached the very edge of its strength. They are not stopped by a sudden, overwhelming wall of fire, but by something far more gentle and far more absolute. They are stopped by the winter, and by the slow, undeniable draining of their lifeblood. The roads ahead are closed, held by the quiet, stubborn resilience of the American boys in the village. The roads behind are gone, swallowed by the shifting snows and the closing jaws of the surrounding forest. There is no way forward. There is no way back. The cage has closed. But it is a cage without bars. It is built entirely of white drifts, of towering, impassive pine trees, and of the vast, gray, indifferent sky. To stand in the center of this trap is to experience a strange, haunting kind of peace. The violent momentum that has carried these men across continents, through autumn rains and winter blizzards, suddenly evaporates. In its place, a profound and eerie stillness descends. The great iron machines, the massive tanks that had rumbled with such terrifying power just hours before, are slipping into a deep, final sleep. The fuel tanks are dry. The last drops of dark, heavy diesel have been burned away, exhausted in the desperate push to reach the valley. Now, the engines cough, sputter, and fall utterly silent. Without the heat of the motors, the winter reclaims the metal almost instantly. A thick, sparkling layer of frost begins to creep up the dark steel treads. It blooms across the sloping armor, tracing delicate, fern-like patterns of ice over the iron. A young German driver sits inside the cramped, freezing belly of his machine. His hands are still resting on the heavy steering levers. He does not try to turn the ignition again. He knows the sound of an empty heart. He simply sits in the dim, shadowed cabin, listening to the absolute quiet taking over the forest outside. For days, the deafening roar of this engine has been his entire world. It has been his companion, his shield, his voice. Now, in the sudden silence, he can hear the soft, rhythmic sound of his own breathing. He can hear the tiny, delicate tick-tick-tick of the cooling metal contracting in the bitter air. He slowly pulls his hands back from the levers. He reaches out and rests his palm against the cold interior wall of the hull. It is a gesture of quiet mourning. He is saying goodbye to the beast that carried him so far. He unlatches the heavy steel hatch above his head and pushes it open, letting the pale, gray light of the winter afternoon spill into the dark cabin. He climbs out into the snow, leaving the iron giant behind to become a monument in the woods. Outside, the reality of the closing cage is washing over the infantry. They are scattered among the trees, taking shelter beneath the heavy, drooping branches of the evergreens. They are so incredibly tired. Their uniforms are stiff with frozen snow, their boots soaked through with icy water. Their supply lines are severed, lost somewhere in the white expanse behind them. There are no warm rations coming. There are no fresh blankets. There is only the snow, and the quiet, hollow realization that they have reached the end of their long, freezing road. Underneath a grand old fir tree, two young soldiers sit huddled together, their shoulders pressed tight against one another to share what little body heat they have left. They are boys who should be in schoolhouses, or helping their fathers in quiet workshops, but the current of the world has deposited them here, in this freezing, foreign forest. One of the boys reaches into his haversack. His fingers are numb and clumsy, but he searches the canvas corners with a desperate, quiet hope. He finds nothing but crumbs and a single, small square of hardened chocolate, wrapped in silver foil. It is a meager, fragile thing. He looks at it resting in the palm of his dirty, gloved hand. He has been saving it for days, waiting for a moment when he might need a sudden burst of strength to keep walking. But there is nowhere left to walk. He slowly peels back the silver foil. The chocolate is pale and brittle from the cold. He looks at his friend, whose eyes are closed, his head resting back against the rough bark of the tree, shivering beneath his heavy coat. The first boy does not eat the chocolate. He does not break it in half to share it. He simply reaches out and gently presses the small, sweet square against his friend's pale lips. The younger boy opens his eyes, confused for a moment. He looks at the chocolate, and then at his friend. A look of profound, heartbreaking gratitude softens his tired face. He takes the small offering, letting the rich, dark sweetness melt slowly against his tongue. It is a microscopic act of love, a tiny spark of warmth in a vast, freezing void. It is the understanding that when everything else is stripped away, when the fuel is gone, and the road is blocked, and the war is lost, all that remains is how we treat the soul sitting next to us in the dark. This is the true nature of the cage. It strips away the grand illusions of conquest and duty, leaving only the fragile, enduring core of humanity. A few yards away, an older soldier stands alone at the edge of the tree line. He is looking out across the snowy fields toward the village of Stoumont, which is barely visible through the falling flakes. He does not hold his rifle, it hangs forgotten by its sling over his shoulder. He reaches into the inside pocket of his tunic and pulls out a photograph. It is a picture of his wife and his small daughter, standing in front of a brick house in a city he hasn't seen in over a year. The edges of the paper are worn soft from being touched 1,000 times. He stares at their faces. He memorizes the curve of his wife's smile, the bright, innocent light in his daughter's eyes. A terrible, beautiful sorrow swells in his chest. He knows the cage is locked. He knows that the vast, empty distance between this Belgian forest and that brick house will likely never be crossed. But he does not panic. He does not fall to his knees and weep. He experiences a quiet, profound surrender. He touches the face of his daughter in the photograph with a gentle, freezing thumb. He closes his eyes and imagines her voice, letting the memory ring clearly in his mind, louder than the howling wind. He builds a warm, safe room inside his heart, and he places his family there, keeping them perfectly safe from the snow and the shadows. He folds the photograph carefully and tucks it back over his heart. He accepts the end of his journey with a quiet, breathtaking dignity. The winter afternoon deepens, and the light begins to fail. The gray sky turns the color of bruised slate. The snow falls heavier now, large, feathery flakes that drift down with a hypnotic, rhythmic grace. The snow is the final warden of the cage. It covers the tracks the heavy machines made in the mud. It fills the footprints of the weary men. It dusts the tops of their helmets and settles on their shoulders. It works tirelessly, silently, to erase the scars they have brought to this valley, burying the iron and the exhaustion under a blanket of pure, untouched white. For the soldiers trapped within the forest, the falling snow brings a strange, heavy comfort. It is a soft, suffocating blanket that asks nothing of them. It does not ask them to march. It does not ask them to fight. It only asks them to rest. The burden of the advance, the heavy, crushing weight of pushing forward at all costs, is finally lifted from their shoulders. The relief is palpable. It is a physical sensation, an easing of the tight, knotted muscles in their backs, a slowing of the frantic, anxious beating of their hearts. They are no longer conquerors. They are no longer a vanguard. They are just cold, tired boys, waiting in the woods for the long night to come. They gather in small groups beneath the trees, pulling their coats tightly around themselves. They speak in hushed, mist-filled whispers, their voices barely carrying over the sound of the wind. They do not talk of the morning. They talk of home. They share memories of warm hearths, of mothers singing in kitchens, of the smell of roasting chestnuts on a snowy city street. They weave these memories together like a patchwork quilt, pulling it over themselves to keep the darkness at bay. The great iron machines sit silently in the background, towering shadows slowly disappearing beneath the snow. They look like ancient, forgotten monuments of a civilization that has long since passed away. The men do not look at them anymore. They have surrendered their trust in the iron, placing it instead in the quiet, shared warmth of their brothers. The cage is closed. The winter has won. But as the soldiers face the end of their long, freezing road, there is no terror in their eyes. There is only a deep, human weariness and a poetic, heartbreaking resignation. They watch the snowflakes drift down from the darkening sky, feeling the cold seep into their bones, and they finally allow themselves to close their eyes. The valley holds them gently in its vast, frozen embrace, whispering a soft, mournful lullaby as the light fades away, leaving the young men to dream of distant fires and a peace they will only find in the quiet, sweeping shadows of the snow. To walk away from the armor that kept you safe is to step naked into the breath of the winter night. Deep within the twisting, shadowy corridors of the Ardennes, the great iron beasts have finally surrendered. The deep, rumbling heartbeats of the engines, which had thundered through the valleys and shaken the snow from the ancient pines, sputter and cough, before falling into an absolute, breathless silence. The fuel is gone. The massive steel tracks, thick with packed ice and dark earth, will turn no more. The momentum of the world has ground to a complete and permanent halt, leaving the German vanguard stranded in a vast, indifferent ocean of white. The order to abandon the machines is not given with a shout, but passed along in hushed, defeated whispers that drift like mist through the freezing air. It is a profound, unsettling transition. For days, these towering giants of steel had been everything to the young men inside them. They were a shield against the biting wind, a warm hearth generated by diesel and friction, a moving fortress that made them feel invincible. To leave them behind is to leave behind the very illusion of safety. A young driver sits in the cramped, shadowed cabin of his tank one last time. The metal walls, once warm with the heat of the engine, are already growing painfully cold. He reaches out with a grease-stained glove, his fingers lingering on the heavy steering levers. He knows the shape of them perfectly, the exact amount of pressure needed to make the great machine turn. He pulls a small, frayed cloth from his pocket and gently wipes a smudge of dirt from the glass of the dials. It is a strange, tender gesture, the quiet farewell of a boy to the iron shell that had been his only home in this foreign wilderness. He pushes open the heavy steel hatch above him. The bitter, freezing air rushes in, a sharp reminder of the vulnerable world outside. He climbs up, his boots slipping slightly on the frosted armor, and drops down into the deep, waiting snow. All around him, in the dim, bruised twilight of the forest, the same silent ritual is taking place. Hatches are left open to the falling snow. Dark, empty cabins begin to fill with the white powder, the winter slowly claiming the spaces where young men had just been breathing. The tanks sit motionless among the trees, their long barrels pointing blindly into the darkening woods. They are no longer weapons of war. They are hollow monuments, sleeping giants left behind to be swallowed by the quiet, unyielding forest. The men gather their few meager belongings. They strip off their heavy, cumbersome gear, leaving behind the weight of ammunition and iron, carrying only what they need to survive the freezing march ahead. They wrap their woolen scarves tighter around their necks, pull their caps down over their ears, and look toward the impenetrable wall of the dark woods. To step into the forest tonight is to step into a ghost story. Beneath the dense, overlapping canopy of the evergreens, the night is absolute. The pale gray light of the sky cannot pierce the heavy branches, leaving the forest floor plunged into a deep, disorienting blackness. The young soldiers move in a single, winding line, their boots crunching softly in the deep powder. They follow the shadow of the man in front of them, trusting blindly in a path they cannot see. The silence of the woods is vast and heavy. It presses against their eardrums, magnifying every small sound. The snap of a dry twig beneath a boot sounds like a fractured bone. The rustle of a heavy branch shedding its load of snow sounds like a sudden, rushing breath. They are surrounded by an eerie, profound quiet that makes them feel incredibly small, mere fragile specks wandering through an ancient, sleeping kingdom. As they push deeper into the trees, the cold begins to work its dark magic. It is a creeping, pervasive chill that slips beneath their heavy coats and finds the spaces between their ribs. It numbs their fingers and toes, turning their limbs heavy and slow. Exhaustion, a deep, bone-weary fatigue that they have been fighting for days, finally catches up to them in the dark. A young boy, no older than 17, stumbles over a hidden root. He falls hard into the snow, his hands sinking deep into the freezing powder. For a moment, he simply lies there. The snow is so soft, and his body aches with such an overwhelming intensity. It would be so easy to just close his eyes, to let the winter wrap its quiet, white blanket around him, to slip away into a peaceful, dreamless sleep. The desire to rest is a physical weight, pressing him down into the earth. But before the cold can fully claim him, a pair of strong, rough hands reaches down beneath his arms. It is an older soldier, a man whose face is lined with exhaustion, but whose eyes still hold a fierce, stubborn light. He heaves the younger boy up, pulling him back to his feet. "Not here," the older man whispers, his voice a low, steady rumble in the dark. "You do not stop here." The young boy sways, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. "I can't feel my feet," he sobs, a quiet, desperate sound that is instantly swallowed by the vastness of the woods. "I can't walk." The older soldier does not urge him to be brave. He does not speak of duty or the long march ahead. Instead, he guides the boy to the trunk of a massive oak tree, sitting him down gently against the rough bark. He kneels in the snow, unbuckling his own heavy pack with clumsy, freezing fingers. He reaches deep inside, past his meager rations, and pulls out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He carefully unwraps it, revealing a single pair of thick, dry woolen socks. They are a treasure beyond measure in this frozen wasteland. He had been saving them for himself, for a moment of absolute desperation. But looking at the trembling boy, he knows that the moment is now. With gentle, patient hands, the older soldier helps the boy remove his frozen, stiff leather boots. He peels away the wet, icy fabric clinging to the boy's feet and slides the dry, warm wool over his pale toes. The relief is instant and profound. The young boy closes his eyes, a single, warm tear slipping down his freezing cheek. It is a monumental act of everyday heroism. In a world stripped of all comfort, to give away your only source of warmth is the purest, most beautiful kind of love. The older soldier helps the boy put his boots back on, then pulls him to his feet, sliding his own shoulder under the boy's arm to take half his weight. "Lean on me," he whispers. "We walk together." And so they continue, a line of weary shadows moving slowly through the dark. They are no longer an advancing force, they are just lost souls, desperate for the morning light. They rely entirely on the quiet, unbreakable bonds of their shared suffering. They pass a canteen back and forth, savoring the few drops of freezing water. They share the last of their hard ration bread, breaking the crust into tiny, equal pieces. To keep their minds from the biting wind, they retreat into the sanctuary of their memories. A soldier walking near the back of the line rests his hand over the breast pocket of his tunic. Inside is a letter from his mother. He cannot read it in the dark, but he knows the shape of the words. He imagines her sitting at the kitchen table, the warm glow of the oil lamp illuminating the soft lines of her face. He thinks of the smell of baking bread, the sound of the clock ticking on the mantel, the feeling of the thick quilt on his childhood bed. He builds this warm, safe room in his mind, and he steps inside, locking the winter out. These memories are their true armor. The heavy steel plates of the tanks have been left behind, but the love of their families, the quiet hope of returning to a peaceful life, forms a protective shell around their shivering hearts. It gives them the strength to lift a heavy boot, to push through a deep drift, to take one more agonizing step into the blackness. Behind them, at the edge of the woods, the abandoned metal giants are already fading from the world. The snow falls steadily, coating the long barrels, filling the open hatches, smoothing over the sharp, violent lines of the armor. By morning, they will be nothing more than strange, white hills in the landscape, completely reclaimed by the forest. The footprints of the retreating men are vanishing, too. The wind sweeps the soft powder over the depressions, erasing their path, wiping away the evidence of their painful journey. The woods are swallowing them whole. As the night deepens, the line of soldiers seems to lose its physical form. In the absolute dark, with their footfalls muffled by the snow, they become little more than whispers. They are ghosts moving through the trees, silent and ethereal, leaving no trace upon the earth. They carry their private fears and their quiet resilience into the deepest shadows of the Ardennes, fading slowly into the vast, beautiful, and terrifying peace of the winter wilderness. The forest stands tall and indifferent, guarding the sleeping iron and the vanishing men, as the quiet village in the valley finally rests, undisturbed, under the long and gentle night. To survive the long, heavy dark is to earn the profound and fragile gift of the morning light. Beneath the frozen earth of Stoumont, and the damp and vaulted cellars where time had lost its shape, a new sensation begins to bloom. It is not a sound, but the distinct, echoing absence of one. For days, the ground above had trembled with the mechanical rhythm of a world tearing itself apart. The heavy oak beams of the ceilings had groaned under the weight of the passing iron giants, and the dust had fallen in continuous, ghostly showers upon the huddled families. But now, the trembling has ceased. The low, distant thudding that vibrated in their teeth and settled deep in their chests has faded away, replaced by a stillness so absolute it feels almost heavy. In the cellar beneath the great sanatorium, the last of the candles have burned down to nothing more than shallow, translucent puddles of wax. The air is thick and stale, carrying the scent of damp wool, sweet, unwashed bodies, and the lingering, metallic tang of fear. Yet, as the profound silence stretches from minutes into hours, a collective, hesitant breath is drawn. An old man, his face deeply lined like the bark of the ancient pines outside, sits on a wooden crate. He has kept his eyes closed for a very long time, his hands resting quietly on his walking stick. Slowly, he opens them. He looks around the dim, shadowed room at the faces of his neighbors, his children, his friends. He gives a small, almost imperceptible nod. It is time. The journey back to the surface begins with the slow, agonizing creak of the wooden stairs. A young father steps forward, taking the lead. His legs are stiff from days of crouching in the cold, but he moves with a protective, deliberate grace. He climbs the steps one by one, the wood protesting softly beneath his weight. At the top, he reaches out and places his hands flat against the heavy wooden cellar door. He pauses. He takes a long, deep breath of the stale air, gathering his courage, and pushes upward. The door gives way with a soft groan of rusted iron hinges. Instantly, a brilliant, piercing shaft of light cuts through the gloom of the stairwell. It is not the golden, warm light of summer, but the stark, pure, blinding white of a winter morning reflecting off a sea of fresh snow. It floods into the cellar, illuminating the dancing motes of dust in the air, washing over the pale, upturned faces of the villagers below. The father steps up and out, his boots crunching softly into the deep powder that has drifted against the threshold. He raises a trembling hand to shield his eyes, blinking rapidly against the sudden, overwhelming brightness. After days of living in a world of sepia shadows and amber candlelight, the sheer clarity of the light is a physical shock. He squints, letting his pupils slowly adjust to the vast, open expanse of the world. One by one, the villagers follow him. They emerge from the earth like fragile sprouts pushing through the spring soil, hesitant and deeply vulnerable. They step over the threshold, pulling their heavy woolen shawls tight across their shoulders, their breath instantly pluming into white clouds in the biting, crisp air. As their eyes finally adjust, blinking at the pale sun that struggles behind a thin veil of winter clouds, they look upon their home. Stoumont is transformed. The quiet, picturesque village they had known just a few days ago has been fundamentally altered, its familiar geometry shattered and rearranged. Roofs that once sloped with perfect, slate-tiled symmetry now sag and gape, exposing the dark, splintered ribs of their attics to the sky. Sturdy stone walls, built by grandfathers and great-grandfathers to withstand centuries of wind, bear deep, jagged scars. The narrow cobblestone lanes are choked with fallen timber, shattered glass, and the debris of a storm that had nothing to do with the weather. It is a broken world. Yet, nature, in her infinite and quiet mercy, has thrown a blanket over the ruin. The heavy snowfall of the previous night has softened the sharp, violent edges of the destruction. The rubble is coated in pure, pristine white. The shattered beams were delicate caps of frost. The village looks like a beautiful, tragic painting, a silent monument to endurance wrapped in a soft, forgiving slumber. A mother emerges from the stairwell, holding her small daughter tightly by the hand. The little girl is wrapped in a thick quilt that drags in the snow behind her. She does not look at the broken houses or the fallen trees. She tilts her head all the way back, her dark eyes wide and full of wonder, and she simply stares at the sky. She watches the pale, gray-white expanse stretching out endlessly above them, a vast, open dome of freedom. She reaches her tiny, mittened hand upward, as if trying to touch the cold, clean air itself. The mother watches her child, and a profound, overwhelming relief washes over her, a wave so powerful it forces her to her knees in the snow. She pulls the little girl into her chest, burying her face in the thick wool, and begins to weep. They are the tears of survival. They are not tears of sorrow for the broken stones or the lost possessions, but tears of pure, unadulterated grace. They are alive. They are breathing the cold, sharp air. They have walked out of the dark. Across the ruined lane, a heavy wooden door is pushed open, and an elderly woman steps out onto her snowy porch. She looks across the street and sees the kneeling mother. The older woman does not speak. She slowly descends her steps, picking her way carefully through the debris, her felt boots sinking deep into the drifts. When she reaches the mother, she simply kneels down beside her in the snow. She wraps her frail, trembling arms around the shaking shoulders of the younger woman. They hold each other in the center of the ruined street, rocking gently back and forth, entirely wordless, communicating a shared, monumental understanding. We are still here. We are still here. All through the village, these quiet reunions are taking place. Neighbors who had sheltered in separate cellars find each other in the pale light. They reach out with tentative hands, touching arms, cupping faces, assuring themselves that the people they love are truly standing before them in the snow. They share small, fragile smiles that tremble at the edges. They offer whatever tiny comforts they possess, a dry handkerchief to wipe away a tear, a gentle pat on the back, a saved crust of bread pulled from a deep coat pocket. Amidst the villagers, resting quietly against the remaining stone walls and sitting on the snow-covered rubble, are the young American soldiers. They are a portrait of absolute, beautiful exhaustion. Their helmets are pushed back, their faces smudged with soot and deeply lined with an unnatural, weary age. They watch the villagers emerge with quiet, red-rimmed eyes. A young boy from a farm in the Midwest sits on a fallen chimney stack, his rifle resting across his knees. He watches the little girl in the quilt staring at the sky. A slow, gentle smile spreads across his dirty face. He reaches into his breast pocket with a numb, clumsy hand and feels the familiar shape of the letter he has been carrying. For days, that piece of paper was his only tether to the world, a desperate prayer folded in the dark. Now, sitting in the quiet aftermath, the letter feels different. It is no longer a plea for survival, it is a promise of return. He knows that soon, he will sit down with a stubby pencil, and he will write a new letter. He will tell his mother that the storm passed. He will tell her about the little girl in the snow, and how the sky looked when the village finally opened its doors. An older village man, his hat held respectfully in his hands, slowly approaches the sitting soldier. The man does not speak English, and the boy does not speak French. But language is an unnecessary thing in the wake of such profound survival. The old man simply looks into the boy's eyes, places his hand over his own heart, and gives a deep, slow bow of his head. The young soldier nods back, swallowing hard against the sudden, thick lump in his throat. He reaches out and gently rests his gloved hand on the old man's arm for a fleeting second. In that brief, silent exchange, the vast ocean between their cultures vanishes. They are just two human beings, standing in the ruins of the world, profoundly grateful for the beating of the other's heart. As the morning stretches on, the villagers begin to sift through the remnants of their lives. They move slowly, their hands numb from the cold, searching the debris with a quiet, heartbreaking reverence. A woman finds a single, unbroken porcelain teacup resting perfectly upright in a pile of shattered brick. It is a fragile, delicate thing, painted with tiny blue flowers, miraculously untouched by the violent shaking of the earth. She picks it up, brushing the snow from its rim with her thumb. She holds it to her chest as if it were a priceless jewel. It is a tiny piece of the before, a delicate bridge to the past, and a sudden, fierce anchor of hope for the future. The sun, which had been hiding behind the pale winter clouds, finally finds a small break in the gray. A soft, golden ray of light pushes through the overcast sky, slanting down across the valley. It catches the frost on the broken timbers, turning the ice into a million tiny, sparkling diamonds. It falls upon the faces of the villagers and the soldiers, offering a gentle, phantom warmth against the freezing air. They all pause. They lift their faces to the light, closing their eyes, blinking at the sun. It is a moment of bittersweet joy. The world they knew has been irrevocably altered. The roads are blocked with snow, the cellars are cold, and the winter still holds the Ardennes in a tight, unyielding grip. The work of rebuilding, of healing the deep scars left in the stone and in the soul, will be long and arduous. But as they stand together in the golden light, sharing the quiet, rhythmic sound of their own breathing, they realize what the winter could not take from them. The walls may have fallen, but the community remains. The iron may have broken the timber, but it could not break their quiet resilience. They are tethered to one another by an invisible, unbreakable thread of shared endurance. They breathe in the sharp, pine-scented air. They feel the steady beating of their hearts. They open their eyes and look around at the transformed, broken, and beautiful village of Stoumont. They blink at the sun, feeling the gentle grace of a new day, ready to walk forward together into the quiet, healing peace of the winter snow. When the thunder finally rolls away into the mountains, it is the silence that rings the loudest. In the wake of the great struggle, the village of Stoumont exhales a long, shivering breath, settling into a profound and heavy quiet. The mechanical beasts that tore through the winter roads have fallen still, their engines cooling in the frosty air. The brilliant, chaotic flashes of light that painted the night sky have faded, replaced once more by the soft, gray canopy of the winter clouds. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world that is fractured and bruised, yet undeniably, beautifully alive. At the center of the village, the old stone church stands with its roof damaged and its windows blown bare, but its sturdy tower still reaches toward the heavens. Inside that belfry hang the ancient bronze bells that have marked the rhythms of this valley for generations. They rang for weddings in the bright summer sun, and they tolled for the passing of the seasons. Today, they do not ring. The ropes are still. Yet, their very silence is a kind of music, a deep, resonant hymn of peace that washes over the snow-covered cobblestones and the broken slate roofs. Through this quieted village, the survivors begin to wander. They do not march, and they do not hurry. They walk with the slow, deliberate steps of sleepwalkers waking from a long and terrifying dream. Soldiers in olive-drab coats, their shoulders dusted with snow, move side by side with the villagers who have emerged from the dark cellars. The lines that separate them, the differences in language, in uniform, in the countries they call home, have completely dissolved in the freezing air. They are no longer strangers. They are fellow travelers who have weathered the exact same storm, bound together by the simple, miraculous fact that they are still breathing. They step carefully over the fallen timber and the scattered stones, their eyes sweeping the transformed landscape. There is a gentle awe in their faces, a quiet reverence for the sheer scale of what they have endured. A young American boy, his helmet hanging loosely from his webbing, stops to pick up a shattered piece of a wooden chair. He turns it over in his bare, numb hands, tracing the grain of the wood. He thinks of the kitchen it came from, the family that sat upon it, and a profound, aching sorrow fills his chest. He gently places the wood back onto the snow, resting it there like a delicate flower laid upon a monument. Inside the heavy walls of the St. Edouard Sanatorium, and within the surviving rooms of the sturdiest stone houses, a different kind of quiet work is underway. These spaces have become sanctuaries of healing, filled with the soft, murmuring voices of those tending to the wounded. The air here smells of damp wool, melted snow, and the sharp, clean scent of iodine. We find a young medic kneeling on a cold tile floor beside a cot. He has not slept in 3 days. His hands, usually so steady, tremble slightly from the deep, bone-weary exhaustion that pulls at his frame. He is working to bandage the arm of a boy who looks too young to have ever left his mother's side. The boy is pale, his eyes wide and clouded with pain, but he does not cry out. Beside the medic kneels an elderly woman from the village. She wears a dark, heavy shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, and her silver hair is pulled back into a neat braid. She holds a chipped porcelain basin filled with warm water she patiently heated over a small, smoky fire built in the ruins of her own kitchen. She dips a clean linen cloth into the water, wrings it out with gentle, practiced hands, and softly wipes the dirt and sweat from the wounded boy's forehead. She speaks to him in French, a language he does not understand, but the cadence of her voice is a universal lullaby. It is the soothing, rhythmic hum of a grandmother comforting a frightened child. The young soldier closes his eyes, leaning into the warmth of the cloth and the tenderness of her touch. The medic looks at the woman, offering a tired, immensely grateful smile. They share a look of absolute understanding. In this makeshift ward, there are no armies. There are only broken bodies, and the gentle, tireless hands working to mend them. Outside, the physical hunger of the long days begins to make itself known, a dull, hollow ache in the belly that replaces the sharp adrenaline of fear. But there is little left to eat. The supply lines are buried under the snow, and the village pantries were largely emptied during the long hours in the dark. Sitting on the snow-dusted steps of a ruined bakery, an American infantryman opens his canvas pack. His hands are cracked from the cold, his fingernails rimmed with dark earth. He pulls out a small, green tin of field rations. It contains a few hard, dry biscuits, a small lump of processed cheese, and a tiny packet of instant coffee. It is a meager, unappetizing feast, but to a starving man, it is a treasure. As he pries the lid open with his thumb, he feels the weight of someone watching him. He looks up. Standing a few feet away, partially hidden behind a splintered wooden post, is a local boy of about 8 years old. The boy's coat is too thin for the winter air, and his eyes are wide, fixed entirely on the tin in the soldier's hands. The soldier pauses. His own stomach cramps with a fierce, demanding hunger. He thinks of the long march still ahead of him, whenever the orders come to move again. But then he looks at the boy's sunken cheeks, and the pale, trembling line of his small mouth. Without a word, the soldier breaks the hard biscuit in half. He splits the cheese. He holds his hand out, offering the lion's share to the child. The boy approaches slowly, his boots shuffling in the snow, like a timid bird coming to an outstretched palm. He takes the food with fingers that are blue from the cold, whispering a breathless word of thanks. A moment later, the boy's mother emerges from the shadows. She sees the empty tin in the soldier's hand and the food in her son's. Her eyes fill with sudden, bright tears. She reaches beneath her heavy apron and pulls out a single, slightly wrinkled apple, perhaps the last piece of fresh fruit in the entire village, saved and hidden away through the dark days. She presses it into the soldier's hand, closing his dirty fingers around the red skin. It is an exchange of profound, heartbreaking grace. They sit together on the steps, chewing their meager rations in silence, sharing a communion of survival in the freezing winter air. Yet, amid the relief of the morning, there is also the heavy, inescapable weight of gentle mourning. The peace that has fallen over the valley did not come without a cost, and that cost is counted not in numbers, but in the empty spaces left behind. In a quiet grove of pines just outside the village edge, a sergeant walks slowly among the trees. The snow here is undisturbed, a pristine blanket covering the forest floor. He stops beneath a towering evergreen and kneels down. He reaches into the pocket of his heavy coat and pulls out a small, silver pocket watch and a folded piece of paper. He had carefully unpinned these from the uniform of a friend who found his rest in the snow before the dawn broke. The sergeant holds the watch in his palm, feeling its cold, metallic weight. He knows the face inside it well. He knows the girl smiling in the photograph tucked into its lid. He traces his thumb over the folded letter, a letter written in the dark cellar just the night before, filled with promises of coming home to a warm summer porch. He does not weep loudly. The sorrow he feels is too vast, too deep for tears. It is a quiet, hollow ache that settles into his very bones. He makes a silent, sacred vow to the winter trees. He promises to carry this watch across the ocean, to walk up the path to that warm summer porch, and to place these fragile pieces of a life into the hands of the woman who waits. He tucks the items safely against his own chest, rising slowly to his feet. He leaves his friend to the gentle embrace of the forest, carrying his memory forward into the light. As the afternoon stretches on, the pale winter sun begins its slow descent toward the western ridges. The sky turns a soft, bruised lavender, casting long, blue shadows across the snow. The temperature drops, bringing a fresh, biting chill to the air, but the people of Stoumont do not retreat into the dark cellars. They gather in the streets and in the doorways. The soldiers and the villagers sit together, wrapped in whatever blankets and coats they can find. They lean against one another, sharing the precious, radiating warmth of their bodies. They are completely, beautifully exhausted. The adrenaline that kept their hearts racing and their eyes wide open has finally burned away, leaving them hollowed out and peaceful. A young private closes his eyes, resting his head back against the stone wall of the church. He listens to the quiet murmur of voices around him, a blending of French and English, weaving a soft, comforting tapestry of sound. He feels the cold air on his face, but inside, his spirit is entirely warm. He survived. The village survived. The long, terrifying night is over. Above them, the belfry of the church stands tall against the darkening sky. The silent bells remain still, holding their heavy, bronze tongues. They do not need to toll to announce the end of the struggle. The peace is already here, resting in the shared rations, in the bandaged wounds, and in the folded letters tucked safely over beating hearts. It is a profound, exhausted peace, settling gently over the valley like the falling snow, wrapping the quieted village of Stoumont in a long, dreamless, and beautiful slumber. Even the deepest scars of the earth will eventually surrender to the quiet, forgiving grace of the falling snow. Time in the Ardennes forest does not move in sudden, sweeping gestures. It moves with the slow, deliberate patience of the seasons, carried on the back of the winter wind and the gentle, rushing current of the Meuse River. The great, terrible storm that had descended upon the village of Stoumont has finally broken, rolling away over the distant, dark ridges, leaving behind a valley that is exhausted, bruised, but undeniably alive. The young men who fought in the freezing mist, the boys who stood shoulder to shoulder in the deep powder, have gathered their canvas packs and slung their rifles over their tired shoulders. They have marched away down the winding forest roads, their heavy boots carrying them toward the horizon, leaving the village to the quiet embrace of the people who call it home. The echo of their footsteps fades into the whispering pines, becoming just another memory woven into the ancient fabric of the woods. In their wake, the village sits in a profound and heavy silence. It is a broken place. The sturdy stone walls bear the jagged marks of the struggle. The slate roofs, once a perfect, overlapping armor against the rain, are shattered and open to the sky. The cobblestone lanes are choked with the debris of shattered timber and broken glass. To look upon it is to see a world that has been deeply wounded. But the heart of Stoumont has never lived in its stones or its roof tiles. The true heart of this valley beats within the people who emerge from the cellars, the people who stand in the pale light and look upon their ruined homes not with despair, but with a quiet, unimaginable resilience. They do not weep for the fallen stones. They reach down with cold, calloused hands, and they begin to pick them up. A grandfather, his back bent by the weight of many winters, stands in the center of what used to be his front parlor. He reaches into the rubble and pulls out a heavy, wrought-iron fire poker. He brushes the plaster dust from its handle. He carries it to the hearth, which is still standing amidst the ruin, and he begins to clear the ashes. He finds a few unbroken logs of dried oak, laying them carefully in the grate. With a single, striking match, he brings the fire back to life. The tiny, golden flame flickers, catches the dry bark, and begins to grow. A thin ribbon of fragrant wood smoke rises up through the broken chimney, drifting out into the freezing air. It is a microscopic act, but it is a monumental declaration. The fire has returned. The hearth is warm. Life will go on. As the days turn into weeks, the sky above the valley begins to soften. The bruised, heavy clouds of the great storm dissolve into a smooth, pearl-gray expanse. The air grows incredibly still, losing its bitter, biting edge. The wind drops to a gentle sigh. And then, from the high, silent dome of the heavens, a new snow begins to fall. This is not the violent, driving blizzard that accompanied the shadows. This is a healing snow. It falls with a slow, hypnotic grace, the flakes large and feathery, drifting down like white blossoms from an unseen orchard. They do not sting the cheeks, they kiss them softly. They do not blind the eyes, they mesmerize them. The snow settles over the village of Stoumont like a cool, soothing balm over a fevered skin. It lands softly on the jagged edges of the broken walls, rounding them out, turning them into soft, white hills. It gathers on the splintered branches of the great oak tree in the square, wrapping the wounded wood in a delicate, sparkling bandage. It covers the dark, scorched earth of the fields, painting the world back into a canvas of pure, unbroken innocence. Out in the deep, ancient forest, the snow is performing its quiet magic on the iron giants left behind. The massive, abandoned tanks that sit silently among the pines are slowly being claimed by the winter. The falling flakes gather on the long, steel barrels and fill the open, rusted hatches. Day by day, hour by hour, the harsh, mechanical lines of the machines are softened and obscured. They are returning to the earth, becoming nothing more than strange, sleeping mounds beneath the evergreens. The forest is taking back its domain, burying the remnants of the struggle, insisting on a profound and permanent peace. The fresh snowfall acts as a gentle curtain, closing the act on the terrible things the valley has seen. It asks the earth to rest. It asks the people to breathe. Thousands of miles away, across the vast, gray ocean, the memory of this snowy village is arriving in small, quiet moments. In a warm, brightly lit kitchen in Pennsylvania, a mother stands by her wooden table. She is holding a slightly crumpled piece of paper, the edges worn soft from its long journey across the sea. The handwriting is rushed, scribbled in pencil, but it is the most beautiful thing she has ever seen. She traces her fingers over the words. "I am safe," the letter says. "The winter was hard, but we held on. I am coming home." She looks out her own kitchen window. The snow is falling in her yard, too, dusting the branches of her apple tree. For a brief, magical moment, the distance between the American kitchen and the Belgian forest vanishes. The snow connects them. She closes her eyes and sends a silent, radiant wave of gratitude out into the universe, blessing the cold, distant valley that spared her son, blessing the village cellars that kept him warm, and blessing the invisible bonds of love that pulled him through the dark. For the boys who walked away from Stoumont, the memory of the village will forever be etched in their minds. But as time moves forward, as they return to their farms and their cities, to their wives and their growing children, the memory begins to change. The terrifying noise of the shadows fades into a quiet hum. The biting cold of the trenches softens into a distant chill. What remains in their hearts is not the trauma, but the profound, enduring light of the humanity they found there. They remember the taste of the hard peppermint candy shared in the doorway of a ruined bakery. They remember the smell of the chicory coffee offered by a stranger in the mist. They remember the solid, reassuring weight of a brother's shoulder to lean on when they could not take another step. They carry the village with them, not as a scar, but as a deep, beautiful testament to what the human spirit can endure when it is anchored by love. Back in the valley, the heavy, healing snow continues to fall. It piles up on the windowsills of the houses that are slowly, stubbornly being rebuilt. The rhythmic ringing of hammers echoes through the cold air, a hopeful, musical sound replacing the thunder of the past. A young village child, bundled in a thick, knitted sweater and a bright red scarf, steps out of her front door. She does not look at the patched roof of her home or the new timber holding up her porch. She runs out into the pristine, untouched snow of the lane. She spins in a circle, her arms thrown wide, her face tilted up to the falling flakes. She laughs, a bright, clear, bell-like sound that cuts through the winter quiet. She drops to her knees and begins to gather the fresh snow, packing it between her small mittens. She is building a snow fort, completely unaware of the iron and the history buried deep beneath the drifts. To her, the snow is just a playground. It is a canvas for her imagination. In her bright, innocent joy, the village is fully, finally reborn. The past has been tucked away, and the future is dancing in the street. This is the great, enduring resilience of the human spirit. It is like the ancient pines of the Ardennes. The winter winds may howl, the ice may snap their branches, and the heavy snows may bow them toward the earth. But their roots are wrapped deeply around the stones in the dark. They do not break. And when the spring eventually comes, as it always does, they will push new, green needles out into the sun. We bend, we break, we hide in the dark cellars of our own fears. But we always emerge to blink at the sun. We sweep our floors, we light our fires, we hold out a piece of bread to a stranger, and we begin again. The snow falls over Stoumont, thick and silent. It covers the footprints of the soldiers who marched away. It covers the scars on the ancient stones. It blankets the sleeping forest, wrapping the trees in a heavy, peaceful quilt. The valley is breathing a long, slow sigh, settling into a deep and quiet slumber. The history of the struggle is secure, safely folded into the letters kept in cedar boxes, and quietly honored in the hearts of those who remember. But the earth does not hold on to the sorrow. The earth simply asks for the snow. Look out into the quiet white. Listen to the profound, unbroken silence of the falling flakes. Let it wash over you. Let it soothe the tired edges of your own day. The storms will always pass. The sun will always rise. And the snow will always fall, pure and beautiful, covering the past and offering a quiet, gentle peace. The village rests. The forest sleeps. The night is soft, and the world is safe. Close your eyes, let the quiet hold you, and drift away into the peaceful, silent white.